Three men in black suits had her cornered. The cameras were blind. The exits were blocked. And everyone in that five-star restaurant was too busy with their champagne to notice a woman about to disappear. Everyone except the maintenance worker in the stained jacket, the one holding his daughter's hand, the one who hadn't spoken above a whisper in 3 years, the one who looked at those men and said 5 words that stopped time itself. Wrong table, wrong day. Before we begin this incredible journey, I want to invite you to stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me tell you about Daniel Cross. The chandeliers at Bellamy's caught light like frozen tears. Daniel Cross noticed this because noticing things was what kept him alive. Not in any dramatic sense, but in the quiet way that mattered. The way a loose bolt on a ventilation shaft could become a lawsuit. The way a flickering exit sign could mean the difference between order and chaos when smoke filled a hallway. The way 3 men in matching black suits could position themselves around a corner table with the precision of chess pieces moving toward checkmate. He wasn't supposed to be here. Bellamy's was the kind of restaurant where a cup of coffee cost more than his hourly wage, where the violin music came from actual violins played by actual musicians, where the staff wore gloves and spoke in voices designed to make you feel both welcomed and quietly judged. It was not a place for maintenance technicians who smelled like machine oil and regret. But Emma had begged. "Please, Daddy," she had said that morning, her small fingers working another paper crane into existence. "Just this once. For my birthday." She was 7 years old today, 7 years of raising her alone, 7 years since the fire. The reservation had taken 3 months of saving, skipping lunches, picking up extra shifts at the office complex downtown. The table they'd been given was small, tucked near the kitchen doors where the noise provided convenient cover for conversations Bellamy's preferred not to showcase. Daniel didn't mind. Emma had already declared the breadbasket the fanciest thing she'd ever touched, and that made every sacrificed lunch worth it. "Daddy, look!" He followed her gaze to the chandelier. "It looks like it's crying," Emma whispered. "But happy crying, like when you watched my dance recital." Daniel smiled. It was a rare expression on his face these days, so rare that his own reflection sometimes startled him, like seeing a stranger who'd forgotten how his features were supposed to arrange themselves. "Happy tears," he agreed. "The best kind." He returned to scanning the room. It was habit. 3 years working night shifts at Mercer Tower had trained him to read spaces the way other people read books. Every room told a story if you knew the grammar. Load-bearing walls, electrical panels, fire suppression systems, emergency routes, and people. People told stories too. The couple by the window were celebrating an anniversary. You could tell by the way she kept touching the new bracelet on her wrist, surprised by its weight, not yet accustomed to the commitment it represented. The man eating alone near the bar had already checked his phone 23 times in the last 10 minutes, rehearsing conversations that would never happen. The family of 4 in the center of the room was performing happiness for each other. Smiles that didn't quite reach the parents' eyes, children too young to notice the cracks in their foundation. And then there was the woman in the corner. She was maybe 35, wearing a blazer that suggested professionalism but not wealth, her hair pulled back in a way that prioritized function over fashion. She'd ordered water, not sparkling, not still, just water, and had been nursing it for 20 minutes while pretending to read something on her phone. She wasn't reading. Her eyes moved too fast, darting to the exits, cataloging faces, measuring distances. Daniel recognized that particular brand of awareness because he practiced it himself. The 3 men arrived at 7:47 p.m. Daniel noted the time because the kitchen doors swung open at that exact moment, briefly flooding their corner with noise and light, and when they closed, the men were simply there, like they'd materialized from the restaurant's shadows. They were good, professional. The first one, tall, early 40s, gym-manufactured muscles straining against his suit jacket, positioned himself between the woman and the emergency exit near the restrooms. The second, shorter, rounder, with the soft features of someone who delegated violence rather than performed it, took the seat directly across from her, blocking her view of the main dining room. The third, lean, young, with the coiled energy of a spring wound too tight, stood near the window, his body angled to block anyone approaching from the host station. Triangle formation, classic. The woman's face went pale. "Daddy?" Emma's voice pulled him back. "Is that lady okay?" Children notice things too, different things sometimes. Things adults trained themselves to ignore because ignoring was easier than intervening. "I'm sure she's fine, sweetheart." But he wasn't sure. That was a lie, and Daniel Cross tried very hard not to lie to his daughter. The man across from the woman, the soft one, the delegator, leaned forward and said something. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he could read the geometry of the threat. The way the man's hand rested on the table, fingers splayed, taking up space. The way his shoulders squared to make himself larger. The way his smile carried no warmth, only teeth. The woman shook her head. The delegator's smile disappeared. He spoke again, faster now, and his hand moved from the table to her wrist. Not grabbing, not yet, but resting there with the weight of a promise. "Daddy, that man is touching her, and she doesn't like it." Daniel looked at his daughter, 7 years old, paper cranes still clutched in her small hands. Eyes that saw everything because no one had taught her yet that looking away was easier. "Stay here," he said. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to see if she needs help." "Like when you helped Mrs. Patterson with her boxes?" "Something like that." He stood up. The restaurant continued its quiet symphony of privilege, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the soft scrape of expensive cutlery against plates that cost more than his car payment. No one looked at Daniel. No one ever looked at Daniel. That was the point of people like him. They kept the lights on and the toilets working and the world spinning smoothly, and in exchange they were rendered invisible. He walked toward the corner table. The young one, the spring wound too tight, saw him first. His hand drifted toward his jacket in a motion so practiced it was almost unconscious. "Can I help you?" His voice was polished, rehearsed. "I think you can," Daniel said. He stopped 3 feet from the table, close enough to be heard, far enough to watch all 3 of them at once. The delegator looked up, annoyance creasing his soft features. "This is a private conversation." "I'm sure it is." "Then I'd suggest you get back to your—" His eyes traveled down Daniel's clothes. The faded flannel shirt, the work pants with the permanent stains at the knees, the steel-toed boots that had no business on Bellamy's imported marble floors. "Dinner. I'd suggest you take your hand off her wrist." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when the universe holds its breath. The woman looked at Daniel. He saw fear in her eyes, deep, genuine fear, but underneath it, something else. Hope. The desperate, fragile hope of someone who had stopped expecting rescue. "Excuse me?" The delegator's voice dropped half an octave. "Your hand," Daniel said. "Off her wrist. Now." The tall one by the emergency exit shifted his weight. The young one's hand moved another inch toward his jacket. "I don't know who you think you are," the delegator said, "but this doesn't concern you. Walk away while you still can." Daniel didn't walk away. Instead, he did something strange. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even a threatening smile. It was the smile of a man who had run out of fear a long time ago, who had nothing left to lose, who had already survived the worst thing that could happen and was still standing. "Here's what I know," Daniel said, and his voice carried just enough to reach the tables nearby, heads beginning to turn. "I know you positioned yourself in the camera blind spot by the kitchen. I know your friend over there is blocking the emergency exit that leads to the service corridor. I know the kid by the window has something under his jacket that he's been touching every 15 seconds since he walked in." The delegator's face shifted. Calculation replaced annoyance. "I also know that the woman at table 12 has been recording on her phone for the last 3 minutes because she thinks this is some kind of reality show prank. And the couple by the bar? He's a retired detective from the 14th precinct. I've seen him at the building where I work. He's been watching you since you blocked the emergency exit." Daniel paused. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your hand off this woman's wrist. You're going to stand up slowly, and you're going to walk out of this restaurant before everyone in this room realizes what kind of people you really are." For 5 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then the delegator laughed. It was a quiet laugh, controlled, the laugh of a man who had heard threats from better men than this maintenance worker in his goodwill flannel. "You've got courage," he said. "I'll give you that. But courage doesn't change arithmetic. There are 3 of us and 1 of you. And you've got a little girl over there who's going to grow up without a father if you don't turn around right now." Daniel's smile faded. Something cold moved behind his eyes. "Wrong table," he said. "Wrong day." The woman's name was Catherine Webb. She learned this an hour later, after the police had come and gone, after the ambulances had taken the 3 men away, after the restaurant manager had comped their meals and offered profuse apologies for any disturbance to your dining experience. She learned it when Catherine approached their table, hands shaking, voice steadier than Daniel expected. "I need to talk to you." Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, exhausted by the evening's chaos, her paper crane clutched against her chest like a talisman. Daniel watched his daughter breathe, in, out, before looking up at the woman who had nearly disappeared tonight. "You should go home," he said. "Get some rest. Call someone you trust." "I can't go home." Catherine slid into the seat across from him, uninvited but somehow inevitable. "They know where I live, they know where I work. They've known for weeks." "Then go to the police." "I've been to the police." Her laugh held no humor. "Where do you think I'd got the evidence they're trying to take?" Daniel studied her face. Mid-30s, he'd guessed correctly. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. The kind of tension in her jaw that came from grinding your teeth through sleepless nights. "What evidence?" "You really don't know who I am?" "Should I?" Catherine's eyes narrowed, reassessing him. "My name is Catherine Webb. I'm an investigative journalist. I've been working on a story for 3 years, the Meridian Housing Corporation." The name hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. Meridian Housing Corporation. "I see you've heard of them," Catherine said quietly. "Everyone's heard of them." "Not everyone knows what I know." She leaned forward. "They're not just a real estate company. They're a machine that buys up affordable housing, strips it down, cuts every safety corner imaginable, and resells it at triple the price. They've been doing it for 15 years across 12 states. That's not a secret. There have been lawsuits. Lawsuits they've settled, investigations they've buried, inspectors they've bought. Catherine's voice dropped. "But I have something they can't bury. I have records, internal communications, proof that they knew about the safety violations in the Hartwell complex. They knew the electrical systems were compromised. They knew the fire suppression was inadequate. And they covered it up." Daniel's hand trembled. The Hartwell complex. Building C, 3rd floor. 47 people died in that fire, Catherine continued, not noticing his reaction, too focused on her own words. 47 people burned to death because Meridian wanted to save $200,000 on renovations. I can prove it. I have the documents, the emails, the inspection reports they falsified. "Why are you telling me this?" Catherine stopped, really looked at him. "Who are you?" she asked. "How did you know about the camera blind spots? How did you see their positioning? That thing you did with the taller one, when he went for his weapon, you moved like someone who's been trained." "Yes." Daniel said nothing. "Those men," Catherine pressed, "they were professionals, private security contractors, the kind corporations hire when they need problems to disappear. And you handled all 3 of them with a butter knife and a cloth napkin." "I didn't hurt them." "No, you didn't." She leaned back, something like wonder in her expression. "You could have, but you didn't. You just stopped them." Daniel looked at his sleeping daughter, her small chest rising and falling, the paper crane still pressed against her heart. "What did you do?" Catherine asked. "Before you were a maintenance technician?" "Yes." "I fix things." He met her eyes. "Things that were broken." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Catherine studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black drive, the kind used to store data. "This is everything," she said. 3 years of work. Every document, every email, every recorded conversation. If something happens to me, I need someone to make sure it gets out. Someone they won't expect. Someone who doesn't exist in their system. "You don't know me. I know you're the only person in 3 years who saw what was happening and tried to help." Her voice cracked slightly. "Everyone else looked away. Every single person in this restaurant saw something wrong, and they looked away. You didn't. Daniel stared at the drive. The Hartwell fire, he said slowly. Building C, 3rd floor, Unit 317. Catherine's face went still. How do you know that address? Because my wife died there. The words hung in the air between them, heavy, undeniable, the kind of truth that changes everything that comes after it. 3 years ago, Daniel continued, his voice flat. Her name was Sarah. She was visiting her sister for the weekend. I was supposed to be there too, but Emma got sick, so I stayed home. The fire started at 2:47 in the morning. The alarms didn't work. The sprinklers didn't work. The emergency exits were locked from the outside because management wanted to stop homeless people from sleeping in the stairwells. He looked at Catherine. I know exactly who Meridian Housing Corporation is. I know exactly what they did. And I've spent 3 years trying to forget it because my daughter needs a father more than she needs revenge. Catherine's hand trembled as she held the drive. You're the one, she whispered. Daniel Cross. I saw your name in the files. You were one of the families who tried to sue. Your case was dismissed for lack of evidence because they destroyed it. Her eyes filled with tears. I have it. The evidence they destroyed. I found copies, backups, things they didn't know existed. I have proof that they knew, Daniel. Proof that they let your wife die to save money. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmured something unintelligible, and settled again. Daniel looked at his daughter, his whole world, the only thing that had kept him breathing for 3 years. Then he looked at the drive. Then he looked at Catherine Webb. What do you need me to do? The drive contained 4,147 files. Daniel learned this later that night, after he'd put Emma to bed, after he'd triple-checked the locks on their small apartment, after he'd plugged the drive into his ancient laptop and watched the folder structure bloom across his screen like a roadmap to hell. Emails. Thousands of them. Conversations between Meridian executives discussing cost optimization strategies and acceptable risk thresholds and regulatory management protocols. In plain language, how to cut corners, how to hide evidence, and how to pay off the people who might notice. Inspection reports. The real ones. Stamped confidential and marked for internal use only. Fire suppression systems rated at 40% capacity. Electrical wiring significantly below code. Emergency lighting non-functional in 73% of tested units. And then, buried deep in a subfolder labeled Legal Contingencies, Daniel found the document that made his vision blur. Hartwell Complex. Risk Assessment. Classification. Executive. Only date, March 2019. Based on current maintenance schedules and infrastructure analysis, the probability of a significant fire event in Building C within the next 24 months is estimated at 67%. Recommended immediate action: full electrical rewiring and fire suppression upgrade. Estimated cost, $2.3 million. Alternative option: continue current maintenance schedule with quarterly inspections. Estimated cost of potential liability based on comparable incidents and settlement history. $800,000, $1.2 million. Recommendation: alternative option presents superior cost-benefit ratio. Risk accepted. Risk accepted. Sarah had died because someone did the math and decided that paying off dead families was cheaper than keeping them alive. Daniel closed the laptop. He walked to Emma's door and pushed it open. She was sleeping with her mouth slightly open, one hand still curled around a paper crane, a nightlight casting animal shapes across her walls. He had made her a promise 3 years ago, standing in a hospital hallway that smelled of antiseptic and grief. He had promised to be there, to be present, to choose life over revenge. He had kept that promise. But Catherine was right. The evidence she'd gathered changed everything, not just for him, for the other families, for the 46 other people who had lost someone in that fire, for the thousands of people still living in Meridian properties, still trusting that the walls around them were safe, for all the Sarah Crosses who might still be saved. He went back to the laptop and opened it again. Until 3 in the morning, he read. But the call came at 6:47 a.m. Daniel was making breakfast, pancakes, Emma's favorite, in the shape of animals because that's what Sarah used to do, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. Yes? Mr. Cross. The voice was male, cultured, the kind of voice that had been trained to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. My name is Richard Vance. I'm senior counsel for Meridian Housing Corporation. Daniel's spatula stopped moving. I believe you had an interesting evening. Did I? Don't be coy, Mr. Cross. It doesn't suit either of us. Vance's tone remained pleasant, professional. My clients are aware that you intervened in a private meeting last night. They're also aware that you left the restaurant with something that doesn't belong to you. The police have a different interpretation of whose property that was. The police have the interpretation they're paid to have. Not a threat, just a fact. My clients would like to arrange a meeting, today, to discuss the return of certain materials and to explore compensation for your trouble. Compensation. Significant compensation, Mr. Cross. Life-changing compensation. A pause. You're raising a daughter alone, working double shifts, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a building almost as poorly maintained as the ones my clients are accused of neglecting. Imagine what you could do with real resources. Daniel thought about the risk assessment document, the math someone had done, the cost-benefit analysis that measured human lives and settlement payouts. How much? Excuse me? You said significant, life-changing. How much? A satisfied sound, almost a chuckle, came through the phone. I was told you were practical. $2 million deposited into any account you specify, today. And all I have to do is return the drive. And forget you ever saw it. And forget that your clients let my wife burn to death. Silence. Daniel could hear Richard Vance recalculating on the other end of the line, adjusting his approach, selecting new words. Mr. Cross, no. The word came out quiet but final. No, Daniel repeated. I don't want your money. I don't want your meeting. I don't want anything from Meridian Housing Corporation except to watch it burn the way Building C burned, the way my wife burned. That's an emotional response, Vance said carefully. I understand, I do, but emotions pass, and reality remains. The reality is that you have a daughter who depends on you, a job that could disappear tomorrow, a life that could become very complicated very quickly. Is that a threat? It's an observation. Vance's voice hardened slightly. My clients have resources you can't imagine. They've handled problems larger than one maintenance worker with a chip on his shoulder. They'll handle this too, one way or another. The only question is whether your daughter has a father next week. Daniel looked at the pancake he was making. It was supposed to be an elephant, but it had come out lopsided, more like a blob with a trunk. Mr. Vance, he said, do you know what I did before I became a maintenance technician? I know everything about you, Mr. Cross. Then you know I spent 12 years teaching people how to survive situations exactly like this one. How to assess threats, how to manage risk, how to turn a butter knife into an advantage. History is all that matters. Daniel flipped the elephant pancake. It's why your client sent 3 professionals last night and watched them get taken apart by a man in a flannel shirt. It's why you're calling me instead of just sending more. It's why you're offering money instead of just making me disappear. He heard Vance's breathing change on the other end of the line. Here's my observation, Daniel continued. Your clients are scared. They've spent 15 years building an empire on shortcuts and cover-ups, and now someone has proof, real proof, the kind that doesn't disappear when you throw money at it, and they're starting to realize that the man who has that proof isn't someone they can buy or intimidate. Everyone can be intimidated, Mr. Cross. Not everyone. Daniel looked toward Emma's room. But here's the thing. I don't want to be your enemy. I'm not looking for revenge. Revenge won't bring Sarah back. Nothing will. Then what do you want? I want to make sure no one else dies. I want the families of the Hartwell victims to have justice. I want every unsafe building Meridian owns to be fixed or evacuated. I want your clients to face consequences, real consequences, for the choices they made. That's not possible. Then I guess we're done talking. Daniel ended the call. His hands weren't shaking. He noticed this with a kind of detached interest. 3 years ago, a conversation like that would have left him trembling for hours. Now it felt like nothing more than another problem to solve. Maybe that was growth. Maybe it was just numbness. He finished the elephant pancake and started on a giraffe. Emma came to the kitchen table still in her pajamas, hair a wild tangle, the paper crane from last night clutched in her hand like a security blanket. Daddy? Who were you talking to? Nobody important, sweetheart. It sounded important. Daniel set the elephant pancake on her plate and began working on the giraffe's neck. Sometimes things sound more serious than they are. Emma studied him with those eyes. Sarah's eyes, deep brown and too perceptive, and he knew she wasn't buying it. Is it about the lady from the restaurant? What makes you ask that? Because you have your working face on. She stabbed the elephant's trunk with her fork. You always have your working face on when something's broken. Daniel paused mid-flip. What do you think my working face looks like? Like this. Emma scrunched her features into an expression of intense concentration, brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. Then she relaxed. You do it when the garbage disposal makes funny noises, and when the car won't start, and when you think I'm asleep, but you're really sitting in the kitchen looking at pictures of Mommy. Something caught in Daniel's throat. You see a lot, don't you? Mrs. Patterson says I'm observant. Emma took a bite of pancake. She says that means I notice things other people miss. Mrs. Patterson is right. Is the lady okay, the one from the restaurant? Daniel thought about Catherine Webb, about the 3 years she'd spent building a case against people who destroyed evidence for breakfast, about the target on her back that was only getting larger. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I'm going to try to help her. Because something's broken? Something very broken. Something that's been broken for a long time. Emma nodded seriously. You'll fix it. You fix everything. Not everything, sweetheart. Almost everything. She looked at the giraffe taking shape in the pan. Can I help? Help with what? With fixing the broken thing. Daniel's heart clenched. She was so young, 7 years old. She should be worried about schoolwork and imaginary friends, and whether her pancakes looked enough like animals, not about broken systems and dangerous corporations and fathers who might not come home. The best way you can help, he said carefully, is by going to school today and learning everything you can. Knowledge is how people fix broken things. Is that why you read so much? Exactly. And why you always know what's wrong before anyone else does? I don't always know. Almost always. She grinned. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. Daniel slid the giraffe onto her plate. Eat your breakfast. Bus comes in 40 minutes. Emma attacked the giraffe's neck with enthusiasm. Daniel watched her eat and tried to calculate the risks. Catherine had the evidence. He had copies. The story was going to come out one way or another. The only question was how much damage Meridian would do trying to stop it, and who would get caught in the crossfire. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a number he didn't recognize. Check the news. Daniel opened his browser. The top headline hit him like a physical blow. Investigative journalist Catherine Webb missing after restaurant incident. The article was thin on details. Witnesses reported seeing her leave Bellamy's with an unknown man. She hadn't returned to her hotel. Her editor was concerned but hopeful, but Daniel could read between the lines. They'd taken her. Despite the police, despite the witnesses, despite everything. His phone buzzed again. Return the drive. Address attached. Come alone. You have until 5 p.m. After that, we start making phone calls to Child Protective Services about single fathers who put their daughters in dangerous situations. Daniel stared at the screen. Then he looked at Emma, still eating her giraffe pancake, still humming something tuneless and happy, still completely unaware that her world was about to change. Emma? Yeah, Daddy? When you finish breakfast, pack a bag. We're going to visit Mrs. Patterson for a little while. How long is a little while? I'm not sure yet. Is this about the broken thing? Yes? Emma set down her fork. Her face was serious in a way that made her look far older than 7. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart? When you fix the broken thing, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Make sure you don't get broken too. Daniel knelt beside her chair. He took her small hand in his, so fragile, so perfect, everything in the world that mattered, and squeezed gently. I promise, he said. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. But sometimes lies were the only gifts you could give the people you loved. Mrs. Patterson lived 3 floors down in an apartment that smelled of lavender and old books. She was 73 years old, retired from teaching elementary school, and she had been watching Emma since Daniel started working nights. She also had a gun in her nightstand, a security system that would make a bank vault jealous, and reflexes that had kept her alive through 3 muggings in the years before the neighborhood gentrified. Daniel trusted her completely. "How long?" she asked, standing in her doorway while Emma explored the living room behind her. "I don't know. A day. Maybe more. This is about last night." It wasn't a question. "I saw the news this morning." "You shouldn't believe everything you read." "I don't." Her eyes, sharp and assessing, the eyes of a woman who had seen too much to be surprised by anything, swept over his face. "But I know what a man looks like when he's about to do something dangerous. And you, Daniel Cross, look like a man about to do something very dangerous indeed. I'm going to fix something. Fix it or break it." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "I had a husband once who talked like that, came back from Vietnam with that look in his eyes. Spent 30 years trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed." "What happened to him?" "He fixed enough of them." A small smile. "Eventually he found peace. I hope you do too." Daniel hugged Emma goodbye at the door. She pressed another paper crane into his hand, this one red, folded from construction paper, slightly lopsided in the way that made it perfect. "For luck," she said. "I thought cranes were for wishes. This one's for both." She looked up at him with Sarah's eyes. "Come back, Daddy. Promise you'll come back." "I promise." Another lie, but this one at least he intended to make true. The address in the text led to a warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of building that existed on the margins of the city, too run down for legitimate business, too isolated for casual witnesses. Daniel arrived at 4:47 p.m. He'd spent the afternoon preparing, not weapons. Weapons were too simple, too traceable, too easy to turn against you. Instead, he'd prepared information, knowledge, understanding of the battlefield he was about to enter. The warehouse belonged to a shell company owned by another shell company owned by a trust that traced back eventually to Meridian Housing Corporation. It had been used, according to public records, for storage and logistics. The utility bills suggested otherwise: too much power consumption for simple storage, too many after-hours visits logged in security reports. It was a black site, a place for conversations that couldn't happen in boardrooms. Daniel parked his car a block away and approached on foot. The loading dock doors were open. Inside, the space was cavernous and mostly empty. Concrete floor, metal rafters, the lingering smell of motor oil and something else, something chemical. In the center of the space, someone had set up a circle of industrial lights. They illuminated a chair, a single metal chair, bolted to the floor, and the woman sitting in it. Catherine Webb. She was alive. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. She was also bound, zip ties at her wrists and ankles, and someone had hit her hard enough to split her lip and bruise her cheekbone. But she was alive. 6 men stood around her in a loose perimeter. Professional security contractors, from the look of them, military bearing, tactical vests, the kind of awareness that came from training and experience. And standing behind Catherine, hands clasped behind his back, was a man Daniel recognized from the news. Marcus Sterling, CEO of Meridian Housing Corporation. "Mr. Cross." Sterling's voice echoed in the empty space. "Thank you for being punctual. I appreciate a man who respects deadlines." Daniel stopped at the edge of the light circle, close enough to see, far enough to run. Not that running was an option. "Let her go." "Straight to business. I admire that." Sterling moved around the chair, his expensive shoes clicking against concrete. "But I'm afraid it's not quite that simple. You have something that belongs to me, and I have something you seem to care about. The traditional approach would be a trade. A trade implies both parties walk away, doesn't it?" Sterling smiled. It was a warm smile, practiced, the kind of smile that had closed 1,000 deals and destroyed 1,000 lives. "I'm not a monster, Mr. Cross. I'm a businessman. Monsters are wasteful. They break things unnecessarily. They create messes that require cleaning. I prefer efficiency. Is that what you told yourself when you let 47 people burn to death? The smile flickered, just for an instant. Then it was back, solid and unshakable. I told myself what every executive tells himself when faced with difficult choices, that I was protecting something larger, that the needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few, that the world is imperfect, and imperfect systems require imperfect decisions. Those were people, families, children. They were statistics. Sterling's voice hardened slightly. Every system has acceptable losses. Every machine has friction. You can't build something significant without sacrifice. They didn't choose to be sacrificed. Neither do the cows that become your hamburgers. Sterling waved dismissively. We're not here to debate philosophy, Mr. Cross. We're here to make a deal. The drive for Ms. Webb. And then everyone walks away. Daniel looked at Catherine. Her eyes were clear despite the bruising, alert, watching, calculating. She shook her head slightly. Don't do it. I destroyed the drive, Daniel said. Sterling's smile finally cracked. I'm sorry? The drive you're so worried about. I destroyed it, burned it this morning. There's nothing left. You're lying. Maybe. Daniel took a step forward. The guards around the perimeter shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Or maybe I'm telling the truth. The only way to find out is to let her go. If you destroyed the evidence, If I destroyed the evidence, then you have nothing to worry about. Ms. Webb becomes just another journalist with conspiracy theories and no proof. Her story dies. Your empire continues. And if you're lying? If I'm lying, then the evidence is somewhere else, somewhere you can't find, and killing us just ensures it gets released. Sterling studied him. Daniel could almost see the calculations running behind those cold eyes. Probability assessments, risk evaluations, the same kind of math that had turned the Hartwell complex into a death trap. You're bluffing. Am I? You're a maintenance worker, Mr. Cross. A nobody. You don't have the resources or the contacts to distribute evidence on a scale that matters. Even if you have copies, they'll disappear. Everything disappears eventually. Your wife didn't disappear. Sterling's face went still. She died, Daniel continued quietly. Cancer, wasn't it, 3 years ago? About the same time my wife burned to death in one of your buildings. Don't. Her name was Rachel. She was a teacher, elementary school. She believed in you right up until the end, believed that her husband was building something good, something that helped people. I said don't. What would she think now? Daniel took another step forward. The guards raised their weapons. Daniel didn't stop. What would Rachel think if she could see this warehouse? If she could see what you've become? If she could see the choice you're about to make? You don't know anything about her. I know she died believing in you. I know that belief was a gift, the same kind of gift my wife gave me, the same kind of gift my daughter gives me every morning when she looks at me like I can fix anything. Daniel stopped 3 feet from Sterling, close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes. I know that somewhere inside you, there's still a man who doesn't want to be a monster, who remembers what it felt like to be loved by someone who saw the best in him. That man died when she did. Maybe. Daniel reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, making sure every guard could see his movements, and pulled out a paper crane. Red construction paper, slightly lopsided. Or maybe he's just waiting for a reason to come back. He held out the crane. My daughter made this. She's 7 years old. She believes I can fix anything. She believes the world is fundamentally good, that broken things can be mended, that people who do bad things can choose differently. Sterling stared at the crane. I don't want to destroy your company. I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want accountability. I want the families who lost someone to know the truth, and I want you to be the one who tells them. That's not possible. Everything is possible. Daniel pressed the crane into Sterling's hand. Rachel would have told you that every day until you believed it. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Marcus Sterling looked at the paper crane in his hand. Really looked at it, at the clumsy folds, the imperfect symmetry, the impossible hope it represented. And something changed in his eyes. Catherine was released that night. Not cleanly. There were negotiations, lawyers, carefully worded agreements that protected everyone and satisfied no one. But she walked out of the warehouse alive and intact, and that was more than Daniel had expected. The evidence wasn't destroyed. It never had been. Daniel had spent the afternoon making copies, multiple copies, distributed across anonymous servers and trusted contacts and insurance policies that would trigger if anything happened to him or Catherine or Emma. It wasn't a bluff. It was a backup plan. But the strange thing was, he hadn't needed it. Marcus Sterling had made a choice, not the choice Daniel expected, not complete surrender, not public confession, not the dramatic collapse of a corrupt empire, but a choice nonetheless, a first step, tentative and uncertain, towards something that might eventually become accountability. It would take time, months, maybe years. There would be setbacks and betrayals and moments when everything seemed hopeless, but the door was open, and sometimes that was enough. Daniel picked Emma up from Mrs. Patterson's apartment at midnight. She was asleep when he arrived, curled up on the guest bed with 3 new paper cranes arranged on the pillow beside her. Mrs. Patterson had made hot chocolate and let her stay up late, which meant she would be cranky tomorrow, but tonight she looked peaceful. "Did you fix it?" Mrs. Patterson asked at the door. "I started fixing it," Daniel said. "The rest will take a while." "That's usually how it works." She handed him a thermos, more hot chocolate, because Mrs. Patterson believed in preparation. "That woman on the news, the journalist, she's going to be okay?" "I think so." "And you?" Daniel thought about the question, really thought about it. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I think I'm closer than I was yesterday." He carried Emma to the car, strapped her into her booster seat, and drove home through streets that looked different now. The same buildings, the same traffic lights, the same city he'd been invisible in for 3 years. But something had shifted. He had stood up. He had chosen to be seen, and the world hadn't ended. The next morning, Emma woke him by jumping on his bed. "Daddy, Daddy, you're on the news!" Daniel groaned and pulled a pillow over his face. "The restaurant thing! They're talking about the restaurant thing!" He stumbled into the living room, still in yesterday's clothes, and found Emma pointing excitedly at the television. The story had broken overnight. Catherine's editor had received the evidence, all of it, with instructions to publish if anything happened to her. When she'd walked out of the warehouse alive, the story had gone out anyway. Some signals, once started, couldn't be stopped. The headline on the screen read, "Meridian Housing Scandal. Documents reveal company knew about Hartwell fire risks." And there, in the corner of the screen, was a grainy cell phone video from Bellamy's. A man in a stained flannel shirt. 3 men in black suits. A moment that had lasted maybe 30 seconds, but would echo for years. "That's you!" Emma bounced on the couch. "Daddy, that's you." "It is. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero, sweetheart." "You look like a hero." She studied the screen with those impossibly perceptive eyes. "You look like someone who fixed something." Daniel sat down beside her. On the television, the video played again. Wrong table. Wrong day. "Some things," he said quietly, "can't be fixed. Some things are too broken, too far gone, too set in their ways. But you try anyway? You try anyway." Emma nodded seriously. Then she reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out another paper crane, this one blue, made from a torn page of notebook paper. "For the lady," she said. "The one from the restaurant. Will you give it to her?" "I will." "Promise?" "Promise." This time, it wasn't a lie. The morning sun caught the dust motes in the air, turning them to gold. Emma returned to her paper folding, tongue poking out in concentration, creating something beautiful from something ordinary. Daniel watched her work and thought about broken things, about the systems that failed and the people who suffered and the impossible gap between what the world was and what it should be. About Sarah, who had believed he could be more than invisible. About Catherine, who had spent 3 years building a case against people who thought they were untouchable. About Emma, who saw everything and believed in everything and folded paper cranes like prayers. Some things, Daniel knew, couldn't be fixed with tools. Some things required something else entirely. Courage, maybe. Timing. The willingness to stand up when no one expected it. The willingness to say, "Wrong table, wrong day," and mean it. The phone calls started 3 days after the story broke. At first, Daniel ignored them. Unknown numbers, blocked callers, area codes from states he'd never visited. The voicemails piled up like autumn leaves, reporters wanting interviews, lawyers offering representation, strangers claiming to have information that would blow this whole thing wide open. He deleted them all. But on the fourth day, a call came through that he couldn't ignore. Mr. Cross, this is Agent Patricia Reyes with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about Meridian Housing Corporation. Daniel was standing in his kitchen, watching Emma construct an elaborate paper crane village on the living room floor. She'd moved beyond single cranes now, creating families of them, parents and children, teachers and students, an entire ecosystem folded from newspaper and construction paper. I've already given my statement to the police. This isn't about your statement. Agent Reyes's voice was measured, professional, but Daniel could hear something beneath the bureaucratic calm. Urgency. Carefully controlled urgency. The evidence Ms. Webb released has triggered a federal investigation. We're looking at wire fraud, conspiracy, negligent homicide across state lines. This is bigger than one fire, Mr. Cross. Much bigger. What do you need from me? Your testimony? Your expertise? Your... She paused, choosing her words. Your particular skill set. I'm a maintenance technician. You're also a former instructor at the Blackwood Institute for Crisis Resolution. You spent 12 years training security professionals, law enforcement officers, and federal agents in threat assessment and de-escalation techniques. 3 of my colleagues went through your program. Daniel closed his eyes. The past had a way of finding you. No matter how deep you buried it, no matter how completely you reinvented yourself, it waited. Patient, inevitable. That was another life. It was. Agent Reyes' voice softened slightly. I understand you left after your wife's death. I understand you wanted to disappear. But the thing about disappearing, Mr. Cross, is that it only works until someone needs you to reappear. Through the kitchen doorway, Daniel watched Emma add another crane to her village. She'd created a tiny paper hospital, complete with ambulances made from folded index cards. A small figure, a doctor maybe, or a father, stood at the entrance, arms raised in welcome. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking you to help us bring down the people who killed your wife. Not just Meridian, everyone connected to them, the shell companies, the corrupt inspectors, the politicians who looked the other way. We have the evidence, but evidence alone doesn't win cases. We need someone who understands how these people think, how they operate, how they'll try to destroy everything we've built. And you think I'm that person? I think you're the person who walked into a restaurant and read a room full of professional security contractors like they were wearing name tags. I think you're the person who convinced Marcus Sterling to cooperate when everyone else said it was impossible. I think you're the person who's been invisible for 3 years and somehow managed to become the most visible man in America overnight. Daniel said nothing. The hearing is in 2 weeks, Agent Reyes continued. Congressional Oversight Committee. They want to understand how a company like Meridian operated for 15 years without anyone noticing. They want to know who failed, who looked away, who chose money over lives. And you want me to testify. I want you to do more than testify. I want you to help us prepare, to review the evidence, to identify the weaknesses in their defense before they exploit them. A pause. I want you to finish what you started. Emma had moved on from the hospital. Now she was building what looked like a school, complete with a tiny playground made from twisted paper clips and a flagpole crafted from a toothpick. I have a daughter, Daniel said. I know. She's 7 years old. She's already lost her mother. We can provide protection, around-the-clock security, whatever you need. Protection didn't save Catherine Webb from getting kidnapped. Catherine Webb didn't have the FBI on her side. Agent Reyes's voice hardened with conviction. These people are dangerous, Mr. Cross. I won't pretend otherwise. But they're also scared. The story is out. The evidence is public. Their only hope now is to control the narrative, to make this about one bad apple instead of a rotten orchard. If we let them do that, they win. And if they win, more people die. Daniel thought about the risk assessment document, the spreadsheet that had calculated his wife's life as an acceptable loss. He thought about the 46 other families, The other husbands, the other fathers, the other children who had lost someone because a corporation decided that safety was too expensive. He thought about Emma, building her paper village, creating a world where hospitals welcomed everyone and schools had playgrounds and doctors stood ready to help. When do you need an answer? Yesterday would be preferable. Tomorrow is the deadline. I'll call you back. He ended the call before she could respond. Emma looked up from her creation. Who was that, Daddy? Someone who needs help. Are you going to help them? Daniel walked into the living room and sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. The paper village spread around them. Dozens of buildings, hundreds of cranes, an entire community constructed from nothing but patience and imagination. I'm not sure yet, he said. It's complicated. Mrs. Patterson says complicated just means you haven't figured out the simple part yet. Mrs. Patterson is very wise, though. She says you're wise too. Emma placed another crane on the roof of her school. She says you see things other people miss. That's why you fix things so well. Do you know what testimony means? Emma's brow furrowed. Is it like a test? Sort of. It's when someone asks you questions about something that happened, and you tell the truth about what you saw. Like when I told Mrs. Patterson that Tommy Fredericks was the one who broke the classroom window. Exactly like that. Did you see something bad happen? Daniel looked at his daughter, 7 years old, paper cranes in her hands, a world of imagination at her feet. I saw something that hurt a lot of people, he said carefully, and now some other people want to make sure it never happens again. But to do that, they need someone to tell the truth about what happened. And they want you to be that someone? Yes. Emma considered this with the gravity only a child could bring to such moments. She picked up a crane, the red one, the lucky one, the one she'd made for him before he went to the warehouse, and placed it in his hands. Mommy always said the truth was important, she said quietly, even when it was scary. She did say that. And she said that brave people weren't people who weren't scared. They were people who were scared and did the right thing anyway. That sounds like something your mother would say. Emma looked up at him. Sarah's eyes. Sarah's wisdom. I think you should help them, Daddy. I think Mommy would want you to. Daniel held the paper crane. Felt its weight. Impossible weight for something so small, so fragile, so perfectly imperfect. You know that if I do this, things might get harder for a while. There might be people who say mean things about me. There might be times when I have to go away for meetings. Will you always come back? Always. Promise? Promise. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then she returned to her village, adding a new building, a courthouse maybe, or a place where truth-tellers gathered to speak. Daniel called Agent Reyes back. I'm in, he said, but I have conditions. The next 2 weeks were a blur of documents and depositions, secure conference rooms, and encrypted communications. Agent Reyes assembled a team of investigators, prosecutors, and analysts who worked out of a nondescript office building in downtown Washington, surrounded by whiteboards covered in corporate hierarchies and evidence chains. Daniel found himself at the center of it all, not as a witness exactly, but as something else. A translator. An interpreter of the language these people spoke, the games they played, the strategies they employed. They'll attack your credibility first, he told the lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sandra Chen, who had made her reputation taking down pharmaceutical executives. They'll bring up the Blackwood Institute. They'll suggest I was fired, that I had mental health issues, that I left under suspicious circumstances. Were you fired? I resigned. After Sarah died. Daniel spread documents across the conference table. But they'll twist it. They'll find colleagues who are jealous, students who failed, anyone who will say anything negative. That's how this works. And how do we counter that? We don't. We let them attack. We let them spend their ammunition on my character instead of the evidence, and then we present the evidence anyway. Sandra Chen studied him with new respect. You've done this before. I've trained people to do this. There's a difference. Is there? Daniel thought about the question. 12 years at Blackwood, teaching others how to read situations, assess threats, navigate conflicts. All that knowledge, all that expertise, and he'd been unable to save his own wife. Yes, he said finally. There's a difference. Catherine Webb became a regular presence in the office. She'd recovered from her ordeal, physically, at least. The bruises had faded, the split lip had healed, but something in her eyes had changed. A hardness that hadn't been there before. A wariness. "You know they'll come after you too," Daniel said one afternoon, as they reviewed surveillance footage from the warehouse. "Let them." Catherine's voice was flat. "I've spent 3 years building this case. 3 years of threats and bribes and people telling me to give up. If they think a few days in a warehouse changed anything, they don't know me at all." "It changed something." She looked at him sharply. "What makes you say that?" "The way you're sitting. The way you check the exits every time someone enters the room. The way your hand moves toward your bag whenever there's an unexpected noise." He gestured toward her posture. "You didn't do any of that before." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I was prepared," she said finally. "I knew the risks. I accepted them. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it physically," she shook her head. "They tied me to a chair. They hit me. They told me exactly what they were going to do to make me disappear, and I believed them. I believed I was going to die in that warehouse, and nobody would ever know what happened. But you didn't die. Because of you." Her eyes met his. "Why did you come? You had the evidence. You could have just published it. Why risk everything to save someone you'd just met?" Daniel thought about the question. He'd asked himself the same thing 100 times. "Because my daughter was watching," he said. "In the restaurant, I mean. She saw those men corner you. She saw everyone else look away. And she asked me if you were okay." "That's it? Because your daughter asked?" "That's it." He paused. "Or maybe that's just the simple part. Maybe the complicated part is that I spent 3 years being invisible because it was easier than being seen, easier than feeling anything. And then I saw you, saw your fear, saw your courage. And I realized that invisible wasn't the same as safe. It was just another kind of prison." Catherine was silent. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. "For whatever reason." "Me too." They returned to the surveillance footage, but something had shifted between them. An understanding, a recognition of shared wounds. The threats, when they came, were subtle at first. A car that followed Daniel home from the office 3 nights in a row. Hang-up calls to Mrs. Patterson's landline. A note slipped under his apartment door that said simply, "Some things are better left broken." Agent Reyes increased security. Unmarked vehicles appeared on his street. Men in suits who tried to look casual but couldn't quite manage it began appearing at Emma's school pickup. Emma noticed. "Daddy, why is that man always watching me at recess?" "He's a friend of the people I'm helping. He's making sure you're safe." "Safe from what?" "From people who don't want me to help." Emma absorbed this with her usual seriousness. "Are they bad people?" "They're people who've done bad things. That's not exactly the same as being bad people, but it's close." "Mrs. Patterson says everyone can change if they want to." "Mrs. Patterson is an optimist." "What's an optimist?" "Someone who believes good things are possible, even when everything looks impossible." Emma considered this. "Are you an optimist, Daddy?" Daniel looked at his daughter. 7 years old, paper cranes, Sarah's eyes. "I'm trying to be," he said. The preparation intensified as the hearing date approached. Sandra Chen drilled Daniel on his testimony, the questions he'd be asked, the attacks he'd face, the moments when silence was more powerful than speech. "They're going to ask about your wife," she said during one session. "They're going to try to make this personal, to suggest you're motivated by revenge rather than justice." "Aren't I?" "Are you?" Daniel thought about Sarah, about the morning she'd left for her sister's apartment, about the way she'd kissed Emma goodbye, both cheeks, then the forehead, then the nose, their ritual, and how he'd watched from the doorway, half asleep, not knowing it was the last time. "I used to be," he admitted. "After she died, revenge was all I thought about. I imagined burning their headquarters down. I imagined finding Marcus Sterling and making him watch while everything he built was destroyed. And now? Now I think about the other families, the 46 other people who died that night, the thousands still living in Meridian buildings who don't know they're in danger." He paused. "Revenge is personal. Justice is bigger. That's a good answer. It's the truth. Good answers and truth aren't always the same thing. Sandra leaned back in her chair. But in this case, I think they might be. 3 days before the hearing, Catherine burst into the conference room with news. Marcus Sterling wants to testify. The room went silent. That's impossible, Agent Reyes said. He's been completely uncooperative. His lawyers have filed motion after motion to delay. His lawyers didn't know. Catherine was breathing hard, like she'd run to deliver the message. He contacted me directly, said he wanted to talk. It's a trap, Sandra said immediately. They're trying to gather intelligence, find out what we know. Maybe. Catherine looked at Daniel. But he asked for you specifically. Everyone turned to Daniel. Me? He said. Catherine consulted her phone. He said, "Tell Cross I've been thinking about the crane." Does that mean something? Daniel's hand moved to his jacket pocket, where Emma's latest creation rested. A blue crane this time, made from a page torn from her favorite picture book. It might, he said. Absolutely not, Agent Reyes cut in. You're our key witness. We're not risking you on some... He cooperates or he doesn't, Daniel said quietly. That's the choice he made in the warehouse. He chose to listen. Maybe he's chosen to do more. Or maybe he's chosen to eliminate you before you can testify. Then put me in a bulletproof vest and surround me with agents, but I need to hear what he has to say. The meeting with Marcus Sterling took place in a private room at a mid-range hotel, neutral territory, selected by Sterling's remaining lawyers, surrounded by enough federal agents to invade a small country. Sterling looked different than he had in the warehouse. Older, smaller. The expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, as if he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. The confidence that had radiated from him, the absolute certainty of a man who had never faced real consequences, had dimmed to something uncertain. Mr. Cross? He didn't extend his hand. Neither did Daniel. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I would. Neither was I. Sterling gestured to a chair. Please. They sat across from each other at a small table. Through the window, Daniel could see the unmarked vehicles, the agents trying to look casual, the entire apparatus of federal power arranged to protect him. I've spent 2 weeks thinking about that night, Sterling said. The warehouse. What you said about Rachel. I shouldn't have. No, you should have. Sterling's voice cracked slightly. Everyone else treats me like a monster. My lawyers, my board, the press. They all see what I did and assume that's all I am. But you saw something else. I saw a man who'd forgotten who he used to be. I didn't forget. Sterling's hands trembled. I buried it. After Rachel died, I couldn't... She was the one who made me want to be good, who made me believe I could be. When she was gone, it was easier to just stop trying. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. Sterling met Daniel's eyes. 47 people. I know the number. I've memorized their names. I've read about their families, their children, their hopes. I did that because I needed to understand what I'd done, not the abstract concept of it, the reality. Daniel said nothing. Your wife's name was Sarah Elizabeth Cross. She was a kindergarten teacher at Meadowbrook Elementary. Her students called her Miss Sunshine because she wore yellow every Friday. She was visiting her sister Margaret because Margaret had just been diagnosed with breast cancer and needed support. Stop. She died in Unit 3-7. The fire started 2 floors below and spread through the HVAC system, a system I personally approved cutting corners on because the proper installation would have delayed our quarterly targets. I said stop. I killed her. Sterling's voice broke completely. Not accidentally, not through negligence. I sat in a boardroom and signed off on decisions that I knew would put people at risk. I told myself it was acceptable. I told myself the numbers made sense. I told myself that this is just how business works. Daniel's hands were shaking, the same hands that had disarmed 3 professionals with a butter knife, the same hands that had built paper crane villages with his daughter, the same hands that had held Sarah's photograph every night for 3 years. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me a question in that warehouse. You asked me what Rachel would think. Sterling wiped his eyes. I've been asking myself that question ever since.
every hour.
every minute, and I finally have an answer. What answer? She would tell me that it's too late to undo what I've done, that all the regret in the world won't bring back the people who died. But she would also tell me that it's never too late to stop making things worse. Sterling reached into his jacket pocket. Daniel tensed, but the object Sterling produced was small, colorful, unexpected, a paper crane. I made this, Sterling said. I watched videos online. It took me 4 hours to get it right. He placed the crane on the table between them. It's terrible, lopsided, wrong in a dozen ways. Daniel looked at the crane. Sterling was right. It was lopsided, wrong, but it was also recognizable, an attempt. I want to testify, Sterling said, not the sanitized version my lawyers want, the real version. Everything I knew, everything I approved, every decision I made that put profit above people. Why? Because you were right. Somewhere inside me, there's still a man who doesn't want to be a monster. He's been buried for a long time, but he's still there. Your lawyers will never allow it. My lawyers work for me, or they used to. Sterling's smile was bitter. I've spent the last 2 weeks terminating every relationship that was built on what I was. The board has already filed to remove me. My assets are frozen pending investigation. The empire I built is collapsing. And you want sympathy? No. I want... Sterling searched for words. I want to matter, not the way I mattered before, through money and power and fear. I want to matter the way Rachel wanted me to, through truth, through accountability, through the courage to face what I've done. Daniel picked up Sterling's crane, examined its clumsy folds, its uncertain creases, its obvious imperfections. My daughter makes these, he said. She makes hundreds of them. She gives them away to anyone who looks like they need one. Your daughter sounds remarkable. She is. Daniel set the crane down. She also believes that everyone can change if they want to. She's an optimist. Are you? The same question Emma had asked. The same question Daniel had been asking himself for 3 years. I'm trying to be. Then let me try too. Sterling's voice was raw. Let me testify. Let me tell the truth. Let me be the man Rachel thought I was, even if it's 15 years too late. Daniel looked at Marcus Sterling, at the shell of a man who had built an empire on shortcuts and suffering, at the husband who had lost his wife and lost himself, at the human being behind the monster. The hearing is in 3 days, Daniel said. If you're serious, you'll need to coordinate with Sandra Chen. She'll want to prep you on the questions, the format, I'll do whatever she says. And you understand that this won't save you. Testifying won't make you a hero. It won't undo what you've done. The families who lost people, my family, we're not going to forgive you. I know. Then why? Sterling picked up his crane again, turned it over in his hands. Because my wife made me promise something before she died. She made me promise to be a man our children would be proud of. His voice was barely a whisper. We never had children, but maybe there's still a way to keep that promise. Maybe the children of the people I hurt can see that I tried, in the end, to make things right. Daniel stood. I'll talk to Sandra. The rest is up to you. He walked out of the hotel room, past the agents and the lawyers and the entire apparatus of justice, and stepped into the parking lot where the sun was setting over a city that didn't know it was about to change. The hearing room was smaller than Daniel expected. He'd imagined something grand, soaring ceilings, marble columns, the weight of history pressing down from every surface. Instead, he found himself in a converted conference room, cameras crammed into corners, reporters jostling for position, the whole thing feeling more like a very crowded meeting than a moment of national significance. But the faces made it significant. In the gallery sat 46 families. Not all of them. Some lived too far away, some couldn't afford the trip, some couldn't bear to relive the trauma. But enough. Enough mothers and fathers, enough husbands and wives, enough children, some barely older than Emma, who didn't fully understand why they were here, but understood that something important was happening. Daniel sat in the witness area, Catherine beside him, Agent Reyes and Sandra Chen at the prosecution table. Across the aisle, what remained of Meridian's legal team shuffled papers with the desperate energy of people who knew they were losing. And at the end of their table, alone, sat Marcus Sterling, the committee chairman, a silver-haired senator from Massachusetts with a reputation for theatrical indignation, called the hearing to order. We're here today to understand how a corporation entrusted with providing safe housing for American families instead chose to prioritize profits over lives. We're here to ensure that the 47 people who died in the Hartwell Complex fire did not die in vain. The first witnesses were technical, building inspectors who testified about falsified reports, former employees who described the culture of cost-cutting, engineers who had raised safety concerns and been ignored. Daniel listened to all of it, filling in the gaps from the documents he'd memorized over the past 2 weeks. Every time a witness mentioned a specific decision or policy, he could trace it backward through the evidence chain to the boardroom where it was approved. The system became clear. Not one villain, but 100 small compromises. Not one crime, but 1,000 daily decisions to look the other way. When it was his turn to testify, Daniel walked to the witness table with Emma's crane in his pocket. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Daniel Cross. I'm a maintenance technician at Mercer Tower. The chairman leaned forward. Mr. Cross, you've been described in the press as a hero for your actions at the Bellamy's restaurant. Would you characterize yourself that way? No. Then how would you characterize yourself? Daniel thought about the question, about all the labels people had applied to him over the past 3 weeks. Hero, vigilante, victim, avenger. I'm a father, he said, a widower, a man who fixes things that are broken. And what made you intervene that night? My daughter. Daniel's voice was steady. She saw something wrong and asked if we could help. I didn't do anything heroic. I just did what any father should do. I showed my daughter that when something is broken, you don't look away. You try to fix it. The questioning went on for 2 hours. Daniel described the events at the restaurant, his meeting with Catherine, the documents he'd reviewed, the patterns he'd identified in Meridian's operations. Through it all, he felt the weight of 46 families watching him. Their grief, their anger, their desperate need for someone to finally tell the truth. When Meridian's attorney rose for cross-examination, Daniel felt the atmosphere shift. Mr. Cross, you testified that you're a maintenance technician. Is that correct? Yes? But you have another background, don't you? A background in security, in what some might call tactical operations. I was an instructor at the Blackwood Institute. I trained people in threat assessment and de-escalation. De-escalation, the attorney smiled. And yet, according to witnesses, you physically engaged with 3 trained security professionals at the restaurant. Would you call that de-escalation? I would call it proportional response. Proportional? You disabled 3 men using restaurant utensils. I prevented them from harming Ms. Webb. No one was seriously injured. The situation was resolved without weapons being drawn. Daniel met the attorney's eyes. That's what de-escalation looks like when escalation has already occurred. But you could have simply called the police. In the time it would take police to arrive, Ms. Webb would have been removed from the restaurant, and the evidence she carried would have been destroyed. I made a judgment call. A judgment call? Like the judgment call you made to begin a relationship with Ms. Webb after the incident? Catherine tensed beside Daniel. I don't understand the question. You've been seen with Miss Webb repeatedly over the past 2 weeks. Late nights at the investigation office. Private meetings. One might wonder if your involvement in this case is motivated by something other than justice. Sandra Chen was on her feet. Objection. Mr. Cross's personal life is not relevant to his testimony. It's relevant if it demonstrates bias. The chairman banged his gavel. The witness will answer the question. Daniel looked at Catherine, at the hardness in her eyes that had been there since the warehouse, at the strength she'd shown every day since, refusing to let fear define her. Ms. Webb and I have become friends, he said carefully. We've worked together to prepare for this hearing. If that's a crime, then every lawyer in this room is guilty of the same thing. Friends. The attorney's tone made the word sound obscene. And was it friendship that motivated you to destroy evidence before turning it over to the FBI? Silence. I don't know what you're referring to. We have testimony from a former Meridian security contractor that you claim to have destroyed the original evidence drive. That you used this claim to manipulate my client into cooperating with your agenda. Daniel felt the trap closing. Every word was being recorded. Every statement could be twisted. I told the security contractors what they needed to hear to release Ms. Webb. It was a tactical choice. A tactical choice? You lied. I made a statement designed to de-escalate a hostage situation. If that's lying, then every negotiator who's ever talked someone off a ledge is a liar. So you admit that you'll say whatever is necessary to achieve your goals? I admit that I'll do whatever is necessary to protect innocent people from harm. The attorney smiled. Including perjury? Objection. Sandra was on her feet again. Counsel is badgering the witness. Withdrawn. The attorney was still smiling. No further questions. The hearing broke for lunch. Daniel found a quiet corner and called Emma. Daddy, are you done being on TV? Almost, sweetheart. How's school? We made paper snowflakes today. Mine had 6 points, but Tommy Fredericks only made 5, and Mrs. Patterson said that was okay because snowflakes can be different, but I think she was just being nice because 5 points isn't really a snowflake, is it? Daniel smiled. The first genuine smile he'd felt all day. 5 points is fine if you tried your best. That's what Mrs. Patterson said. A pause. Daddy, are the bad people being punished? We're working on it. Good. Another pause. I made you something for when you come home. What is it? It's a surprise, but it has wings. I look forward to it. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. I'll see you tonight. He ended the call and stood for a moment in the quiet corridor, surrounded by the chaos of reporters and lawyers and families seeking justice, and thought about wings, about things that fly, about the freedom that comes from finally telling the truth. When the hearing resumed, it was Marcus Sterling's turn. The room went silent as he approached the witness table. The families in the gallery leaned forward. The reporters stopped their whispered conversations. Even the committee members seemed to hold their breath. Please state your name for the record. Marcus William Sterling, former Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Housing Corporation. Mr. Sterling, you're appearing today voluntarily, is that correct? Yes. And you understand that anything you say may be used against you in subsequent legal proceedings? I understand. Then please tell us, in your own words, what happened at the Hartwell complex. Marcus Sterling took a deep breath, and then he began to speak. He spoke for 3 hours, without notes, without prompting, without the careful legal language his attorneys had prepared. He described the company culture that prioritized quarterly earnings over building safety. The meetings where safety concerns were dismissed as acceptable risk. The pressure from investors to cut costs, cut corners, cut anything that stood between Meridian and its profit targets. He named names, board members who had approved the cost-cutting measures, executives who had signed off on falsified inspection reports, politicians who had received donations in exchange for regulatory leniency. And then he described the Hartwell complex specifically. I received the risk assessment in March of 2019, he said. It stated clearly that the probability of a significant fire event within 24 months was 67%. The recommended action was full electrical rewiring and fire suppression upgrades, cost $2.3 million. He paused. I chose the alternative option. I chose to accept the risk because the math suggested it would be cheaper to pay off the families of anyone who died than to fix the buildings. A sound rippled through the gallery. Not quite a gasp, but something close. The sound of 46 families hearing their worst suspicions confirmed. I made that decision knowing that people might die. I made it anyway. Sterling's voice cracked. And then I went home to my wife, who was dying of cancer, and I held her hand and I told her I was doing important work. I told her I was building something that would outlast us both. He looked directly at Daniel. I was building a machine that killed 47 people, including Sarah Elizabeth Cross. I was building a legacy of suffering, and until 3 weeks ago, I'd convinced myself that this was just how the world worked. What changed 3 weeks ago? Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out the paper crane. The one he'd made himself, lopsided and wrong, but recognizable. A man reminded me of who I used to be. A man who had every reason to hate me showed me something I'd forgotten, that it's never too late to stop making things worse. He held up the crane. This is the first thing I've made with my own hands in 30 years. It's terrible, but I made it anyway because I needed to remember what it felt like to create something instead of destroy it. The chairman leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, you realize that your testimony today effectively destroys any legal defense you might have offered. Yes. And you're proceeding anyway? Yes. Sterling set the crane down. Because my wife asked me to be a man our children would be proud of. We never had children, but maybe the children of the people I hurt can see that I tried at the end to tell the truth. He turned to face the gallery. The 46 families, the parents and spouses and children who had lost everything because of his decisions. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I wouldn't accept it if it was offered. I am asking only for the chance to do one right thing after a lifetime of wrong ones. I am asking for the opportunity to help ensure that no other corporation can do what we did, that no other families have to suffer what you have suffered. He bowed his head. I'm sorry. I know those words are meaningless, but they're all I have left. The hearing room was silent for a long moment. Then, from somewhere in the gallery, a sound. Not applause, not forgiveness. Something more complicated. A woman crying, her sobs cutting through the silence like a knife. Daniel recognized her. Maria Santos, her husband had died in the fire. Her son had been orphaned. She was crying, but she was also nodding. After the hearing adjourned, Daniel found himself outside on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters shouting questions he had no intention of answering. Catherine appeared beside him, guiding him through the crowd to a waiting car. That was incredible, she said as they drove away. Sterling's testimony, it changes everything. The other executives are going to line up to cooperate now. No one wants to be the last person holding the bag. Good. You don't sound happy. Daniel watched the city pass by outside the window, the buildings and streets and people, all going about their lives, unaware of what had happened in that hearing room. 47 people died, he said. Nothing that happened today brings any of them back. Nothing that happens tomorrow will either. But it prevents the next 47. Maybe. That has to count for something. Daniel thought about Emma, about paper cranes and paper snowflakes and paper villages, about the world she was building in her imagination, a world where hospitals welcomed everyone and schools had playgrounds, and fathers always came home. It counts, he said. It just doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Catherine was quiet for a moment. When I started this investigation, I thought the story was about corporate greed, money versus morality. But watching you with Sterling, watching him actually change, I think the story is about something else. What? Redemption. She looked at him. The possibility that even the worst people can choose differently, that even the most broken systems can be fixed. That's optimistic. I'm trying to be. She smiled slightly. Someone told me that's what optimists do. They believe good things are possible, even when everything looks impossible. Daniel thought about the paper crane in his pocket, the one Emma had made, the one Sterling had made. My daughter would like you, he said. I'd like to meet her someday. You will. The car pulled up to his apartment building. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street, and somewhere inside, a 7-year-old girl was waiting with a surprise that had wings. Thank you, Catherine said, for everything. Thank you for not giving up. He stepped out of the car, walked into his building, and took the elevator to the 5th floor. Mrs. Patterson's door opened as he passed. She's been waiting, Mrs. Patterson said, counting down the minutes. You did good today, Daniel Cross. You watched? Everyone watched. Her eyes were bright. Rachel Cross would be proud. Sarah, too. Daniel didn't trust himself to respond. He just nodded and walked to his own door. Emma was standing just inside, bouncing on her toes, something clutched behind her back. Daddy, you're home! You're home and I made you something and it's a surprise and you have to close your eyes. Daniel closed his eyes. He felt something being pressed into his hands, something light, something delicate, something made of paper and patience and love. Okay, open them. He opened his eyes. In his hands was a crane, but not just any crane. A crane made from newspaper, covered in headlines about the hearing, about justice, about change. Emma had carefully cut and folded the articles so that specific words were visible. Truth, courage, family, hope. "It's you," she said proudly. "It's a daddy crane, see? It has all the words from the TV." Daniel knelt down and hugged his daughter, held her close, felt her small heart beating against his chest. "It's perfect," he said. "Mrs. Patterson helped me find the right words. She said you were very brave today." "I just told the truth. That's what brave is." Emma pulled back and looked at him with Sarah's eyes. "Mommy told me that once. She said brave people aren't people who aren't scared. They're people who are scared and do the right thing anyway." Daniel looked at the crane in his hands, at the words his daughter had chosen, at the truth she'd assembled from newspaper headlines and hope. "You're right," he said. "That's exactly what brave is." "Are you going to fix more broken things tomorrow?" "Probably." "Good." Emma took his hand. "But first, can we have dinner? Mrs. Patterson made mac and cheese and I saved you the crusty parts because those are your favorite." Daniel laughed. The first real laugh in what felt like years. "Crusty parts sound perfect," he said. They walked into the kitchen together, the daddy crane still in his hands, the whole city glowing orange through the windows. And for the first time since Sarah died, Daniel Cross felt something that might have been hope. Not certainty, not resolution, just the quiet possibility that tomorrow might be better than today, that broken things could be fixed, that even the wrong table on the wrong day could somehow lead to something right. The indictments came down like dominoes falling in the dark. 3 weeks after Marcus Sterling's testimony, federal prosecutors announced charges against 17 Meridian executives, 4 building inspectors, 2 city officials, and a state senator who had received campaign contributions in exchange for blocking safety regulations. The news cycle exploded with coverage, talking heads debating corporate accountability, survivors giving tearful interviews, legal analysts predicting decades of prison sentences. Daniel watched none of it. He had returned to work at Mercer Tower the Monday after the hearing, showing up for his night shift as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't spent the previous month dismantling one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in American history. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Frank, who had worked maintenance for 30 years and prided himself on minding his own business, had simply nodded when Daniel clocked in. "Saw you on TV," Frank said. "Yeah. Good work." That was all. No questions, no fanfare, just the quiet acknowledgement of one working man to another that sometimes the job required more than fixing broken things. Daniel appreciated that. The work grounded him. The familiar rhythm of checking systems, replacing filters, adjusting thermostats, it reminded him that the world was made of small, fixable problems. That not everything required congressional hearings and federal investigations. That sometimes a loose screw was just a loose screw. Emma adjusted to the new normal with the resilience only children possess. The security details faded as the immediate threat diminished, though Agent Reyes insisted on maintaining enhanced awareness of Daniel's residence for the foreseeable future. Emma had started calling the unmarked car that occasionally sat on their street the boring police, and had taken to waving at the agents inside whenever she passed. "They never wave back," she reported one evening, clearly disappointed. "Mrs. Patterson says they're probably not allowed to be friendly when they're working." Mrs. Patterson is probably right. But everyone should be friendly, even when they're working. Emma folded another crane from the stack of colored paper Daniel had bought her. Especially when they're working. Work is boring enough without being unfriendly, too. You think work is boring? Schoolwork is boring. The good kind of work, like fixing things or making things, that's not boring. She held up her crane. This is the good kind. Daniel looked at the crane. Yellow paper, carefully creased, wings spread wide as if ready for flight. "Who's this one for?" "The lady, Miss Catherine. You said you'd give her one." "I did give her one. That was before. This is a new one, because she looked sad on TV yesterday." Daniel hadn't watched Catherine's interview, but he'd heard about it. She'd spoken about the investigation, about the evidence, about the years of threats and isolation. She'd also spoken about the warehouse, about what it felt like to be tied to a chair waiting to die. "I'll give it to her," he said. "Promise?" "Promise." The next day, Daniel called Catherine. "I have something for you," he said. "From Emma." "Another crane?" "She says you looked sad on TV." Silence on the line, then a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. "She's perceptive, your daughter. She gets it from her mother. I'd like to meet her. Emma, I mean. If that's okay." Daniel thought about the question, about the boundaries he'd built between his personal life and the chaos of the past 2 months, about the careful distance he'd maintained from everyone except Mrs. Patterson and his daughter. "Saturday," he said. "We're going to the park. She wants to fly the kite her grandmother sent." "I'd like that." "It's nothing fancy, just a park." "Nothing fancy sounds perfect." They met at Riverside Park, where the grass was still green despite the advancing autumn, and children ran in chaotic patterns while parents watched from benches and blankets. Emma had insisted on wearing her fancy dress, a yellow sundress with paper crane pins she'd made herself, attached to the fabric with safety pins Mrs. Patterson had supervised. Catherine arrived carrying a gift bag. "You didn't have to bring anything," Daniel said. "I wanted to." She handed the bag to Emma, who was already bouncing with anticipation. "I heard you like making things." Emma tore into the bag and gasped. Inside was a collection of origami paper. Not ordinary paper, but specialty sheets in 100 different colors and patterns, stars and stripes and flowers and geometric designs. "This is the best paper I've ever seen," Emma breathed. "Daddy, look! It has fish on it." "It's from Japan," Catherine said. "Traditional origami paper. I thought you might like to try some different patterns." "Can I make you something right now? Can I?" "We came to fly the kite," Daniel reminded her. "Kite first, then cranes." Emma was already sorting through the paper, selecting the fish-patterned sheet. "I'm going to make you the best crane ever." The kite was red and shaped like a dragon. Daniel's mother had sent it from Arizona, along with a note that said she was proud of him and that his father would have been too. Daniel hadn't spoken to his parents much since Sarah's death, not because of any falling out, but because grief had made him small, had shrunk his world to the essential elements of survival. He was trying to expand it again. "She's beautiful," Catherine said, watching Emma run across the field trailing the dragon behind her. "And she clearly adores you." "She's all I have." "That's not true anymore." Catherine's voice was careful. "You have a lot of people who care about what happens to you. The families from this hearing, Agent Reyes and her team, Sandra Chen, me." Daniel watched his daughter, the red dragon rising into the blue sky, the laughter carrying across the grass. "I'm not good at this," he said, "at letting people in." "Neither am I." "You seem good at it." Seeming and being are different things. Catherine sat down on the grass, and after a moment, Daniel sat beside her. "I spent 3 years as a ghost, living in hotel rooms, using burner phones, trusting no one. By the time you found me in that restaurant, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a conversation that wasn't about the investigation. And now? Now I'm trying to remember." She pulled up grass by the roots, watching the blades separate. "The story is mostly told. The indictments are moving forward. For the first time in 3 years, I don't have a mission. I don't have a purpose. I just have this. Whatever this is. Freedom. Is that what this is?" She laughed softly. "It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being lost." "That's what freedom feels like at first. When you've been trapped for a long time, you forget how to move without walls." Catherine looked at him. "Speaking from experience?" 3 years of it." Daniel watched Emma trying to make the dragon do loops. "After Sarah died, I built walls everywhere, around my work, around my daughter, around myself. I told myself it was protection, but it was really just another kind of prison." "What changed?" "You, the restaurant, those men." He paused. "Emma asked if you were okay, and I realized I'd been asking myself that same question about her for 3 years without ever asking it about myself." "And were you okay?" "No, but I was surviving, which I thought was the same thing." He met her eyes. "It's not." Emma came running back, the dragon kite tangled around her legs, hair wild from the wind. "Daddy! Miss Catherine!" Did you see? Did you see the dragon do a flip? I saw, Daniel said. That was very impressive. The wind took it, but I didn't let go. You told me to never let go of important things. I did tell you that. Emma plopped down between them on the grass, already reaching for the fish-patterned paper. Miss Catherine, do you know how to make cranes? I don't, actually. I'll teach you. Emma's voice carried the authority of someone who has mastered a subject and is ready to share that mastery. It's not hard once you know the folds. Daddy's terrible at it, but he tries anyway. I am not terrible. Your cranes look like lumpy birds. Lumpy birds are a legitimate artistic choice. Emma ignored him. Watch me first, then you try. Catherine watched and Emma explained, and Daniel sat in the autumn sunshine watching two people he cared about discover each other. The dragon kite lay forgotten in the grass. The specialty paper transformed, one fold at a time, into something with wings. There, Emma said finally. Your first crane. Catherine held up her creation. It was lopsided, more lopsided than Sterling's had been, but the wings spread and the head pointed forward, and the thing was recognizably, undeniably, a crane. I made this, she said, and her voice held wonder. You made that, Emma confirmed. Now you have to give it to someone. Give it away? But I just made it. That's the rule. Emma was deadly serious. You make cranes for other people. That's what makes them special. Catherine looked at Daniel. She makes the rules, he said. I just enforce them. Catherine turned the crane over in her hands. Then, with a movement that was almost ceremonial, she presented it to Emma. For the teacher, she said. Emma's face split into a grin. You learned fast. Most grown-ups take forever. I had a good teacher. The afternoon stretched into evening. They bought ice cream from a cart and sat on a bench while Emma practiced her new paper, creating an entire flock of cranes from the Japanese specialty sheets. Catherine told stories about her investigation, the close calls, the near misses, the times she'd almost given up. What kept you going? Emma asked. When it was scary? Catherine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I thought about all the people who didn't have a choice, she said. The people in those buildings who trusted that someone was keeping them safe. They couldn't fight for themselves, so I fought for them. Like Daddy. Exactly like your daddy. Emma nodded, satisfied by this answer. Daddy fights for people too. He says that's what fixing things means, making sure the broken parts don't hurt anyone. That's a very wise way to put it. Mommy taught me. Emma's voice was matter of fact. She taught me lots of things before she went away. Catherine glanced at Daniel, uncertain how to respond. Your mommy sounds like she was very smart, she said carefully. She was. She was a teacher, like Mrs. Patterson, but for little kids. She used to say that little kids were the most important students because they were still learning how to be people. Learning how to be people, Catherine repeated. I like that. Me too. Emma folded another crane. Daddy's still learning sometimes, but he's getting better. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm Daniel hadn't expected. Catherine became a regular presence, not intrusive, not overwhelming, just there. She joined them for dinner once or twice a week. She helped Emma with her homework when Daniel was working nights. She sat in their small living room folding cranes while Daniel fixed a leaky faucet or adjusted the television settings, or did the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. You don't have to do this, Daniel said one evening after Emma had gone to bed and they were sitting in the quiet aftermath of another day. Do what? Be here. Be part of whatever this is. Catherine set down the crane she was folding. Do you want me to leave? That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? Daniel struggled to find the words. 3 years of isolation had made him clumsy with this kind of conversation. The language of connection had atrophied, and he was still learning to speak it again. I'm saying that you have options. The story is told. You could go anywhere, do anything, write about something else, someone else. You don't have to spend your evenings in a 2-bedroom apartment with a maintenance worker and his daughter. You're right, Catherine said. I don't have to. So why do you? She was quiet for a long moment. Because this is the first place in 3 years that feels like somewhere instead of nowhere. Her voice was soft.
What's your source?
Because when I'm here, I remember who I used to be before I became nothing but the investigation. Because Emma makes me laugh and you make me think, and both of those things feel like miracles after what I've been through. That's a lot of pressure for a two-bedroom apartment. It's not pressure. She met his eyes. It's gratitude. Daniel didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But when Catherine picked up her crane again, he picked one up too, and they folded in silence, and the silence was enough. The call from Agent Reyes came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel was at work, checking the HVAC system in the penthouse office of some executive who hadn't shown up in 3 days and probably wouldn't notice if the temperature dropped to freezing. His phone buzzed, and Reyes' name flashed on the screen. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "Marcus Sterling kind of problem." Daniel's hand tightened on his phone. "What happened?" "He's asking for you. Won't talk to anyone else. Just keeps saying he needs to see Daniel Cross." "Why?" "He won't say, but something's wrong. He's been cooperating fully, more than fully, and then this morning he just stopped. Stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped everything. His lawyers are panicking. The prosecutors are threatening to revoke his cooperation agreement." "I'm not a therapist." "No, but you're the only person who's gotten through to him." Reyes paused. "He's in federal custody, minimum security, but still. If he stops cooperating now, the whole case could fall apart." "The case won't fall apart. You have the evidence, the testimony, the other executives are talking." "Sterling's testimony is the cornerstone. Without him, the defense can argue that everything else is circumstantial, that he was a fall guy, a scapegoat. They can muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about the paper crane Sterling had made. Lopsided, wrong, but made. "Where is he?" "I can have a car at your location in 20 minutes. I'll need to make arrangements for Emma." "Already done. Mrs. Patterson has been contacted." Daniel almost smiled. Agent Reyes was nothing if not thorough. 20 minutes, he said. "I'll be outside." The federal facility was 40 miles outside the city, a low complex of beige buildings surrounded by fencing that looked almost decorative, like the architects had tried to make imprisonment as pleasant as possible. Daniel passed through 3 security checkpoints before being led to a private meeting room where Marcus Sterling sat alone at a metal table. Sterling looked worse than he had at the hearing. The weight loss had continued. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hands, folded on the table, trembled slightly. "You came," Sterling said. "You asked." "I wasn't sure you would." Daniel sat down across from him. "Neither was I." Silence stretched between them. Sterling stared at his hands. Daniel waited. "I can't do this," Sterling finally said. "Do what?" "Any of it. The testimony, the cooperation, the—" He gestured vaguely. "The redemption narrative everyone keeps talking about. The story of the bad man who saw the light. You're the one who wanted to testify." "I know." Sterling's voice cracked. "And I meant it. Every word. But now, sitting here waiting for the trial, waiting for the judgment, I keep thinking about all the things I can't take back, all the people I can't save, all the years I can't undo. That's not a reason to stop. Isn't it?" Sterling looked up. "What's the point of redemption if nothing actually gets redeemed? 47 people are still dead. The families are still broken. The buildings are still standing, filled with people who were just lucky enough not to die. The buildings are being inspected, renovated, made safe. Because of the investigation, because of the scandal, not because I chose to do the right thing." Sterling shook his head. "I didn't choose anything. You forced me to face myself. The evidence forced me to cooperate. Everything I've done has been reaction, not action. I'm not redemption. I'm just damage control." Daniel studied the man across from him. The shell of an empire builder, the husk of a husband, the ghost of whatever Marcus Sterling had once been. "Do you remember what you said at the hearing?" Daniel asked. "About your wife's promise?" "I promised to be a man our children would be proud of." "Do you still want to keep that promise?" "I don't know anymore." "Then let me ask you a different question." Daniel leaned forward. "If you stop cooperating, what happens to the case?" "The lawyers say it weakens but doesn't destroy it." "And what happens to the families?" Sterling flinched. "They've been waiting 3 years," Daniel continued. some of them longer. They've watched every hearing, every press conference, every piece of news. They've built their hope on the idea that someone would finally tell the truth about what happened to the people they loved. The truth is already out. Part of it. The documents and emails and spreadsheets, but not all of it. Daniel's voice hardened. Not the part where a man sits on a witness stand and says, "I made these decisions. I knew the risks. I chose profit over people." That's what they need. Not evidence, confession. Not data, humanity. You want me to be their villain. I want you to be their witness. There's a difference. Sterling was silent. You asked me once what Rachel would think, Daniel said. I'll tell you what I think she would say. I think she would say that redemption isn't a destination. It's a direction. You can't undo the past, but you can choose which way you walk into the future. What if I walk alone? You won't. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out something he'd carried since the park. Emma's yellow crane, the one she'd made for Catherine, which Catherine had given back to Daniel after making her own. My daughter believes everyone deserves another chance. She's 7 years old, and she's wiser than most adults I've met. He placed the crane on the table between them. She gave this to someone who needed hope. That person gave it to me, and I'm giving it to you. Not because you deserve it, but because she would want me to. Sterling stared at the crane. Why? His voice was barely a whisper. After everything I did, to your wife, to your family, why would you give me anything? Because holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Daniel stood. I learned that the hard way. 3 years of wanting revenge, and all it did was hollow me out. I'm done being hollow. I don't know if I can be done. Then don't be done. Be in progress. Be trying. Be someone who shows up every day and does the next right thing, even when it hurts, even when it feels pointless. Daniel walked to the door. That's all any of us can do. Cross. Daniel turned. Sterling had picked up the crane. He held it in both hands like something precious and fragile and terrifying all at once. Thank you, he said, for seeing something worth saving. Don't thank me. Prove me right. 2 days later, Agent Reyes called to confirm that Marcus Sterling had resumed full cooperation. His testimony would proceed as scheduled. The case was back on track. Daniel received the news while sitting in his apartment, watching Emma and Catherine fold cranes together. The specialty paper from Japan was almost gone, replaced by newspaper and magazine pages, and anything else Emma could find that had interesting patterns or colors. Good news? Catherine asked, noticing his expression. Progress, Daniel said. Just progress. Emma held up her latest creation, a crane made from a cereal box, the bright colors of cartoon characters forming abstract patterns on its wings. This one's for the sad man, she said, the one you went to visit. How did you know I visited anyone? Mrs. Patterson told me. She said you went to help someone who forgot how to be happy. Daniel looked at Catherine, who shrugged innocently. I may have mentioned something, she admitted. The sad man is trying to remember, Daniel said to Emma. It takes time. Everything important takes time. Emma arranged the cereal box crane next to the others. That's what Mommy always said. Your mommy was right. The autumn deepened, leaves turned and fell. The city prepared for winter, and the trial approached, and Daniel Cross continued to show up for work and come home to his daughter and fold paper cranes with the woman who had somehow become part of his life. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emma already asleep, Catherine asked the question she'd been circling for weeks. What happens after the trial? Daniel considered the question. He'd been avoiding it himself, focusing on the immediate, the tangible, the fixable. I don't know, he admitted. Do you want to know? I used to think I didn't. After Sarah died, the future felt like a threat. Something to survive, not something to plan for. And now? He looked at her, at the cranes scattered across the coffee table, at the yellow paper Emma had insisted on leaving out so they could make more in the morning. Now I think maybe the future is something else, he said. Not a threat, not even a plan, just a direction. Which direction? Forward. He reached for her hand. It was the first time he'd initiated contact that wasn't related to passing documents, or steadying a stack of paper, or the 100 small touches that had become normal without either of them acknowledging it. Forward together, maybe, if that's something you want. Catherine's hand closed around his. It's something I want, she said. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, not needing to speak, while the city hummed outside and their daughter slept in the next room, and the Crane stood silent witness to something that might have been an ending and might have been a beginning and was probably both at once. The photograph arrived 3 days before the trial. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, dropped through the mail slot like 1,000 pieces of junk mail before it. But when Daniel opened it, his blood ran cold. The photograph showed Emma, standing outside her school, waving at the camera with the innocent trust of a child who has never been taught to fear strangers. There was no note, no message, just the image and the implication it carried. We know where she is. We can reach her. Think carefully about what you do next. Daniel's hands shook. The careful control he'd built over 20 years of training threatened to crack. He wanted to scream. He wanted to find whoever had taken this photograph and teach them what a man with nothing left to lose was capable of. Instead, he called Agent Reyes. We need to talk, he said. Now. The response was swift and overwhelming. Within 2 hours, Emma was under constant federal protection, not just the enhanced awareness of before, but active, visible, undeniable security. Mrs. Patterson's apartment became a temporary command center. Catherine moved in with them indefinitely, unwilling to let Daniel face this alone. This is retaliation, Reyes said during the emergency briefing in their living room. Someone connected to Meridian who wasn't caught in the initial sweep. We're running the photograph through every database we have. And until you find them? Until we find them, Emma doesn't leave your sight or ours. She has school. She has a life. I'm not going to lock her in a bunker because some coward sent a photograph. Then we modify. Reyes's voice was firm. Agents in the school. Agents on the route. Agents everywhere until this is resolved. She'll notice. Then you explain it to her, in a way that doesn't terrify her but keeps her safe. Daniel looked at Catherine, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, her face pale but determined. I'll help, she said. With Emma. With explaining. With whatever you need. He nodded. There was nothing else to do. That night, Daniel sat Emma down and told her a version of the truth. Remember how we talked about bad people who did bad things? The ones you helped catch. That's right. Well, some of those bad people are angry about being caught, and they want to scare us into not helping anymore. Emma's eyes went wide. Are they going to hurt us? No. Daniel's voice was absolute. They're not. Because we have friends who are going to make sure we're safe. You'll see some of them at school tomorrow. They'll look like regular people, but they're actually there to protect you. Like superheroes. Exactly like superheroes. Secret ones. Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Will I know who they are? Some of them. Agent Reyes will introduce you. Can I give them cranes? Daniel's heart clenched. Even now, even facing fear she barely understood, his daughter's first instinct was to give. You can give them whatever you want. The days before the trial became a strange kind of siege. Daniel went to work, surrounded by agents who pretended to be maintenance colleagues. Catherine continued her writing, surrounded by agents who pretended to be researchers. Emma went to school, surrounded by agents who pretended to be parent volunteers. And through it all, the photograph hung over them like a sword waiting to fall. On the morning of the trial, Daniel woke before dawn. He'd barely slept. Every sound in the night had been a potential threat. Every shadow a potential enemy. Catherine was already awake, sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Did you sleep? He asked. A little. Did you? No. She held out her hand and he took it, and they sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, waiting for the day that would decide so many things. Whatever happens, she said, you've already won. Have I? You took on a corporation that kills people. You helped bring them down. You gave 46 families the truth they deserved. And I put my daughter in danger. No. Catherine's voice was fierce. They put her in danger, the same way they put everyone in danger by choosing money over lives. You didn't create this threat. You exposed it. Daniel wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that the choice he'd made in that restaurant, The choice to see instead of look away had been right. But in the gray light of morning, with the weight of the photograph pressing down on him, doubt crept in. If something happens to her, nothing will happen to her. Catherine squeezed his hand. We won't let it. Emma appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, her hair a tangled mess. Is today the important day? It is, sweetheart. Are you scared? Daniel looked at his daughter, 7 years old, braver than he could ever hope to be. A little, he admitted. Are you? Emma shook her head. Mrs. Patterson says brave people are scared all the time. They just do the right thing anyway. Mrs. Patterson is very wise. I know. Emma came and climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in months, her body warm against his chest. Daddy? Yes? When the bad people lose, can we go to the park again? I want to fly the dragon kite. We can go to the park. And Miss Catherine can come? Daniel looked at Catherine, who was smiling through tears she was trying not to shed. Miss Catherine can definitely come. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then she reached into the pocket of her pajamas and pulled out a crane. White paper, carefully folded, perfect in its simplicity. This is for you, she said, for the important day. So you remember that you're not alone. Daniel took the crane, held it in his hands, felt its weight, all the weight that impossible, beautiful, breakable things can carry. Thank you, he said. You're welcome. Emma kissed his cheek. Now, can we have pancakes? Daniel laughed. The sound surprised him. How light it felt, how natural, despite everything. We can have pancakes, he said. And in that moment, in the gray light of a morning that would change everything, a father and his daughter and the woman who had become family made breakfast together, and the Cranes watched from their places around the apartment, and the future waited, uncertain but no longer quite so terrifying. Because whatever came next, they would face it together. And together, Daniel was beginning to understand, was its own kind of strength. The courtroom smelled of old wood and nervous sweat. Daniel had expected something clinical, something modern, fluorescent lights and metal detectors, and the cold efficiency of federal justice. Instead, he found himself in a space that felt almost sacred, all dark mahogany and brass fixtures and windows that let in the gray November light like a grudging blessing. The families filled the gallery behind him, 46 of them now, joined by others who had lost people in different Meridian buildings, different fires, different tragedies that had all been connected by the investigation's expanding reach. They sat in rows like congregants at a service, their faces carrying the same expression Daniel had worn for 3 years, grief weathered into something harder, something that could wait forever if it had to. Catherine sat beside him, her hand brushing his knee under the table. Agent Reyes was 2 rows back, flanked by prosecutors and federal marshals. Sandra Chen occupied the lead counsel position, her posture radiating controlled aggression. And across the aisle, the defense team assembled around a table that seemed to shrink under the weight of their impending defeat. The remaining Meridian executives, the ones who hadn't taken plea deals, who had gambled on their lawyers' ability to create reasonable doubt, sat rigid in their seats, their expensive suits suddenly looking like costumes they'd forgotten how to wear. Marcus Sterling was not among them. His cooperation agreement had separated his fate from theirs. He would testify today, and in exchange, he would face a reduced sentence at a minimum security facility. It wasn't justice in any pure sense, but it was the best approximation the system could offer. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Be seated. Judge Harold Morrison was 73 years old, appointed to the federal bench by a president most people had forgotten, known for his patience, his thoroughness, and his absolute intolerance for what he called courtroom theater. Daniel had researched him extensively, looking for bias, for weakness, for any indication of how this might go. He'd found nothing but a man who believed in the law the way some people believed in higher powers. This court is now in session, the United States versus Meridian Housing Corporation and associated defendants. Morrison's voice carried without amplification, filling the space with quiet authority. Ms. Chen, are the people ready to proceed? Sandra stood. We are, Your Honor. Mr. Blackwood? The lead defense attorney, a silver-haired man whose reputation for winning unwinnable cases had commanded fees that could have funded building renovations for a decade, rose with practiced ease. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." "Then let us begin." The morning session was technical. Expert witnesses testified about building codes, fire suppression systems, electrical wiring standards. Charts and diagrams appeared on screens, illustrating the gap between what Meridian's buildings should have been and what they actually were. Daniel had seen all of this before, in the documents he'd studied, in the preparation sessions, in his own nightmares. But hearing it spoken aloud, in this formal setting, with the families listening behind him, transformed data into something else entirely. Every statistic was a person. Every percentage point was a name. Every cost-benefit analysis was a family that would never be whole again. During the lunch recess, Daniel found a quiet corner of the courthouse and called Mrs. Patterson. "How is she?" "Currently teaching Agent Morrison, not related to the judge, apparently, how to make a paper airplane. The poor man hasn't gotten a word in edgewise for an hour." Daniel smiled despite himself. "She's not scared?" "If she is, she's hiding it well. She asked me to tell you that she's saving the good paper for when you come home. Tell her I'll be home soon." "I'll tell her." Mrs. Patterson paused. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "Daniel Cross, I've known you for 3 years, and you've never once been fine. How are you really?" He considered the question, considered the truth it demanded. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not of the trial, of what comes after, of what happens when this is over and I have to figure out who I am without a mission." "Who says you need a mission?" "I've had one for so long. First it was Sarah, then it was surviving without her, then it was this, the investigation, the hearings, the trial. What do I do when there's nothing left to fight?" Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "You live," she said finally. "You take your daughter to the park. You make pancakes on Sunday morning. You fall in love again, if that's what's happening with Catherine, which I suspect it is. You stop being a soldier and start being a person. That sounds terrifying. Most good things are." When Daniel returned to the courtroom, he found Catherine waiting outside the doors. "They found him," she said. "Found who?" "The photographer, the one who took Emma's picture." Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the relief underneath. "Agent Reyes just told me. They traced the photograph to a private investigator who was hired by one of the defendant's family members. The whole thing was a bluff, a desperate attempt to intimidate you into not testifying." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "They're sure?" "They have the PI in custody. He's talking. The family member has been arrested for witness intimidation." Catherine touched his arm. "It's over. That part, at least." "Does Emma know?" "Mrs. Patterson is telling her now, in age-appropriate terms." "Age-appropriate terms for 'someone took your picture to scare your father' is a creative challenge." Catherine smiled. "Something about how the bad people tried one last trick and it didn't work. Emma will probably turn it into a story about superheroes defeating villains. She's good at that. She learned from someone." They stood in the hallway for a moment, the sounds of the courthouse flowing around them, footsteps and murmured conversations and the distant ring of phones. For the first time in days, Daniel felt like he could breathe. "I should get back in there," he said. "I'll be right behind you." "Catherine?" "Yes?" "Thank you for being here, for all of it." She squeezed his hand. "Thank me when it's over." The afternoon session brought Marcus Sterling to the stand. He entered through a side door, escorted by federal marshals, wearing a suit that no longer fit his diminished frame. The courtroom stirred. Whispers, shifting bodies, the collective attention of everyone present focusing on the man who had built an empire on other people's suffering. Sterling took his seat in the witness box. His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on Daniel, then moving to the families in the gallery. He didn't look away from them. Didn't try to avoid their stares. He sat, and he faced them, and he waited. Sandra Chen approached. "Mr. Sterling, please state your former position with Meridian Housing Corporation." "I was Chief Executive Officer from 2008 until my resignation 3 months ago." "And in that capacity, were you responsible for approving major corporate decisions, including those related to building maintenance and safety?" "Yes." Can you describe in your own words the decision-making process that led to the conditions at the Hartwell complex, the building where 47 people died in a fire on March 15, 2022? Sterling took a breath. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its own. We received a risk assessment in March of 2019, he began. It identified significant safety concerns in the building's electrical and fire suppression systems. The recommended action was a complete overhaul, new wiring, upgraded sprinklers, reinforced emergency exits. The cost was estimated at $2.3 million. And what did you decide? I decided to reject the recommended action. Sterling's voice was steady, but Daniel could see his hands trembling slightly. I chose instead to continue with minimal maintenance while accepting the risk of a potential fire event. Why? Because the math suggested it would be cheaper. Sterling looked directly at the jury. I sat in a conference room with my executive team, and we calculated that the cost of potential lawsuits and settlements in the event of a fire would be lower than the cost of prevention. We called it acceptable risk. We put a dollar value on human lives and decided that their deaths would be more economically efficient than their safety. A sound moved through the gallery. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Something more primal. And you made this decision knowing that people might die? I made this decision knowing that people would probably die. Sterling's voice cracked. The assessment gave us a 67% probability of a significant fire event within 24 months. We knew. We knew, and we chose profit anyway. Did anyone object to this decision? Several people raised concerns. They were overruled or transferred or, in some cases, terminated. The company culture I created didn't allow for dissent on matters of profitability. And after the fire? After 47 people died? Sterling was silent for a moment. After the fire, he said finally, I stood in front of cameras and expressed condolences. I promised a full investigation. I donated money to victim relief funds. And then I went back to my office and authorized our legal team to do whatever was necessary to minimize our liability. Including destroying evidence? Including destroying evidence, paying off inspectors, threatening witnesses, everything the investigation has uncovered, I authorized or approved. Sandra let the words hang in the air. Mr. Sterling, why are you testifying today? You could have fought these charges. Your lawyers advised against cooperation. Sterling looked at Daniel. Because someone reminded me that it's never too late to stop making things worse. He pulled something from his pocket. A paper crane, yellow and slightly crumpled. A 7-year-old girl made this. She's never met me. She doesn't know what I've done. But she gave it to her father, and her father gave it to me, and she told him that everyone deserves a second chance. He held up the crane. I don't deserve a second chance. I know that. But maybe by telling the truth now, I can help make sure no other company does what we did. No other executives make the calculations we made. No other families have to bury the people they love because someone decided their lives weren't worth the cost of keeping them safe. He set the crane on the witness stand. That's why I'm testifying, not for redemption, not for mercy, for prevention, so that Sarah Cross and the 46 others didn't die for nothing. The cross-examination was brutal. The defense attorney, Blackwood, approached Sterling with the coiled energy of a predator who had finally found prey worth hunting. Mr. Sterling, you've painted quite a picture of corporate villainy. But let me ask you something. In your testimony, you repeatedly used the word we. We calculated, we decided, we authorized. Who exactly is we? The executive leadership team, which included the defendants sitting at that table? Yes. And you're testifying against them today as part of a plea agreement, correct? An agreement that significantly reduces your own potential sentence? That's correct. So you have a personal incentive to implicate others in decisions that you yourself made? The decisions were made collectively. But you were the CEO, the final authority. The buck, as they say, stopped with you. I don't deny my responsibility. No, you don't. You embrace it. You perform it. Blackwood's voice sharpened. You've become quite skilled at contrition, haven't you, Mr. Sterling? The trembling hands, the cracking voice, the paper crane from a child, very touching. But I wonder if the jury understands what's really happening here. Objection. Sandra was on her feet. Counsel is testifying. I'll rephrase. Blackwood moved closer to the witness stand. Mr. Sterling, before your arrest, you were worth approximately $400 million. Is that accurate? Approximately. And your cooperation agreement allows you to retain a significant portion of those assets. A portion? Yes. Most will go to victim restitution. But you'll still be wealthy, still be comfortable, still live better in minimum security than most Americans live in freedom. Sterling said nothing. So when you speak of accountability, of consequences, of telling the truth, you're still protecting yourself, aren't you? Still managing your image, still calculating the cost-benefit analysis, just with different variables. I don't deny that I benefit from cooperation. Then why should the jury believe that your testimony is anything more than another strategic decision? Another calculation designed to minimize your personal liability? Sterling looked at the defense attorney, then at the defendants, then at the families in the gallery. They shouldn't, he said quietly. Blackwood blinked. Excuse me? They shouldn't believe me because I benefit. They should believe me because the evidence supports what I'm saying, the documents, the emails, the testimony of other witnesses. Sterling's voice strengthened. You want the jury to think this is all theater? Fine. Ignore me. Look at the evidence. Look at the bodies. Look at the buildings that are still standing, filled with people who don't know they're living in death traps. He leaned forward. I'm not a good man, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not asking anyone to forgive me or believe in my transformation. I'm asking them to look at what we did, what your clients did alongside me, and decide whether that should be allowed to continue. Blackwood hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Daniel saw something shift in the courtroom, a subtle realignment of attention, of sympathy, of judgment. No further questions, Blackwood said. The verdict came 3 days later. Daniel was at home when the call came, not because he'd chosen to miss it, but because Emma had woken with a fever and he'd refused to leave her. Catherine had gone to the courthouse in his place, promising to call the moment there was news. Guilty, she said, her voice breaking. All counts, all defendants. Daniel closed his eyes. 3 years. 3 years of grief and rage and slow, grinding investigation. 3 years of wondering if anyone would ever face consequences for killing his wife. Daniel, are you there? I'm here. How do you feel? He looked at Emma, asleep on the couch under a mountain of blankets, her face flushed with fever but peaceful. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Ask me tomorrow. The sentencing is in 6 weeks. Sandra thinks they'll get significant time, 20 years minimum for the worst offenders. Good. The families want to see you. A lot of them are asking about you. I'll come tomorrow, when Emma's better. Of course. Catherine paused. I love you. It was the first time either of them had said it. The words hung in the air, unexpected and inevitable. I love you too, Daniel said. And he meant it. The celebration, if it could be called that, happened at Bellamy's. The restaurant had offered to host the families, free of charge, private dining room, anything they needed. The manager had personally apologized to Daniel for any disturbance the original incident had caused, as if a kidnapping attempt was roughly equivalent to a delayed entree. Daniel had wanted to refuse. The idea of returning to the place where everything had started felt wrong somehow, like closing a circle that should remain open. But the families had asked. And so, on a Friday evening 3 weeks after the verdict, Daniel found himself standing in the same dining room where he'd first said, wrong table, wrong day, surrounded by people whose lives had been shaped by the same tragedy that had shaped his. Maria Santos approached him first. Mr. Cross. Her voice was stronger than it had been at the hearings. I wanted to thank you. You don't need to thank me. I do. She took his hand. My husband, Eduardo, he was a good man, a quiet man. He worked 2 jobs so I could stay home with our son. When he died, I thought I would never feel anything but anger again. I understand. I know you do. Her eyes were bright with tears she wasn't trying to hide. But watching you these past months, watching you choose to help instead of destroy, it reminded me of something Eduardo used to say. He said that the best revenge against evil is to live well, to build something beautiful in the space where ugliness tried to grow. Daniel thought about Emma, about Catherine, about the paper cranes that filled his apartment like prayers made physical. He sounds like a wise man. He was. Maria squeezed his hand. And I think you are too. The evening unfolded in a way Daniel hadn't expected. Not somber, not celebratory, but something in between. A gathering of people who had survived something terrible and were trying to remember what life looked like on the other side. Emma was there, her fever broken, surrounded by other children whose parents had died in the fire or been injured or narrowly escaped. She had brought cranes, dozens of them, in every color and pattern, and was teaching anyone who would learn. You have to fold exactly on the line, she instructed a boy who looked about 10. If you don't, the wings won't be even. Does it matter if the wings aren't even? Everything matters. Emma's voice carried the conviction of someone who had figured out the universe. If you care about the small things, the big things take care of themselves. Catherine appeared at Daniel's side. She's remarkable, she said. She gets it from her mother. She gets it from both of you. They watched Emma continue her lesson, her small hands guiding larger ones through the folds, her patience inexhaustible. I've been thinking, Catherine said, about what comes next. Me too. And? Daniel turned to face her. In the warm light of the restaurant, she looked different than she had that first night. Softer somehow, the hard edges of her investigation years finally smoothing. I've been offered a consulting position, he said. Agent Reyes put in a word with the Department of Justice. They want someone who understands threat assessment to help review corporate safety protocols, identify companies that might be cutting the same corners Meridian did. That sounds like important work. It does. He paused. But it would mean travel, time away from Emma, from you. We'd figure it out. Would we? Catherine smiled. Daniel, I spent 3 years living in hotel rooms, jumping at shadows, trusting no one. If I learned anything from that experience, it's that the people who matter are worth the inconvenience. I'm a lot of inconvenience. You're worth it. He wanted to kiss her. Right there, in the middle of Bellamy's, surrounded by families who had lost everything and were somehow finding their way back to something. But Emma appeared before he could, tugging at his sleeve. Daddy, Daddy, Mr. Sterling is here. Daniel's blood went cold. He turned to see Marcus Sterling standing at the entrance to the private dining room, flanked by 2 federal marshals. The man looked uncertain, out of place, like he'd walked into the wrong party and didn't know how to leave. The room went silent. One of the marshals stepped forward. He asked to come, to speak to the families before his sentencing. The prosecutor cleared it, but if anyone objects, I object. A man Daniel recognized from the hearing stood up. He doesn't belong here. This is for victims, not murderers. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Sterling didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just stood there, accepting their judgment, waiting for whatever came next. Daniel thought about the paper crane, about the conversation in the federal facility, about the man who had killed his wife and then, impossibly, tried to make amends. Let him speak, Daniel said. Every eye turned to him. Daniel, Catherine began. He's earned that much. Whatever else he's done, he told the truth when it mattered. That's not nothing. The room remained frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, the man who had objected sat back down. Sterling walked forward. The marshals remained at the entrance, watching. I won't take much of your time, Sterling said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I know I have no right to be here. I know that nothing I say will bring back the people you lost. I know that my presence is an intrusion on your grief. He paused. But I also know that some of you have questions. Questions that evidence and testimony can't answer. Why? How could someone do what I did? What was I thinking? He looked around the room, met the eyes of the people whose lives he had destroyed. The answer is that I wasn't thinking. Not about you, not about your families, not about anything except numbers on a spreadsheet. I turned human beings into variables, and I made decisions that I knew would hurt people, and I told myself it was just business. His voice cracked. It wasn't just business. It was murder. Maybe not the kind that happens with weapons, but murder nonetheless. I chose money over lives, and 47 people died, and I have to live with that for however long I have left. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of paper cranes. Dozens of them, in different colors, different sizes. A little girl taught me to make these, he said. She told me that when you make something with your own hands, you remember that creating is better than destroying. He walked to the nearest table and set the cranes down. I can't undo what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life making things instead of breaking them. I can tell the truth whenever I'm asked. I can be a warning to others who might be tempted to make the same calculations I made. He turned back to face the room. That's not enough. I know it's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I have. He bowed his head. I'm sorry. For all of it. The silence stretched. Then Maria Santos stood. She walked to where Sterling stood, and for a moment Daniel thought she might hit him, might scream at him, might release all the rage she'd carried since her husband's death. Instead, she picked up one of his paper cranes. My Eduardo believed in second chances, she said. He believed that people could change if they wanted to badly enough. She looked at Sterling with eyes that held no forgiveness, but something that might have been recognition. I don't know if you've changed. I don't know if you're capable of it, but I know that he would want me to hope. She turned and walked back to her seat. One by one, other families approached. Some took cranes. Some didn't. Some spoke to Sterling, harsh words, soft words, words that couldn't be heard from across the room. Some simply looked at him and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something harder to name. Acknowledgement, perhaps. The recognition that even monsters could try to become something else. When it was over, Sterling turned to Daniel. Thank you, he said, for letting me come. Don't thank me. Thank them. I will. Every day. For the rest of my life. The marshals led him away. Daniel felt Emma's hand slip into his. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart? Is the sad man going to be okay? Daniel looked at the door where Sterling had disappeared, at the cranes scattered across the tables, at the families who had somehow found it in themselves to witness a monster trying to become human. I don't know, he said honestly, but he's trying. That's something. Trying is important, Emma said. Mrs. Patterson says trying is the first step to doing. Mrs. Patterson is very wise. I know. Emma tugged his hand. Can we go home now? I'm tired. We can go home. Catherine joined them, and together they walked out of Bellamy's into the cool night air. The city glowed around them, lights in windows, cars on streets, millions of lives unfolding in their own quiet dramas. What are you thinking? Catherine asked. Daniel looked up at the sky. The stars were invisible behind the city's light pollution, but he knew they were there. I'm thinking about forward, he said. Forward? Something you said once. About redemption being a direction, not a destination. I think you said that, actually. Did I? He smiled. I guess I'm wiser than I thought. Emma yawned. Can we have pancakes tomorrow? It's not Sunday. But I want pancakes. Then we'll have pancakes. They walked home through the November night, a father and his daughter and the woman who had become family, and the paper cranes waited in the apartment like promises waiting to be kept. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Cross felt something that wasn't just hope. It was peace. Fragile and uncertain and new, but real. And that was enough. 6 months passed like water finding its level. The sentencing hearing came and went in February, bringing with it the closure the families had waited years to receive. The lead defendants received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The corrupt inspectors got 8 to 12. The politicians faced their own trials, their careers destroyed, their legacies reduced to cautionary tales about the price of looking away. Marcus Sterling received 7 years at a minimum security facility in Connecticut. Light, by any measure. Too light, some of the families said. But he had kept his promise, testifying fully, providing additional evidence, helping prosecutors unravel the network of corruption that had allowed Meridian to operate unchecked for so long. Daniel watched the sentencing from the gallery, Emma's hand in his left, Catherine's in his right. When the judge pronounced the final sentence, he felt something shift inside him. Not satisfaction exactly, but resolution. The kind of feeling that comes when a door finally closes on a room you've been standing in too long. Is it over? Emma whispered. This part is, Daniel said. What part comes next? He looked at his daughter. 8 years old now. Her birthday had passed in January, celebrated with pancakes and paper cranes and a new kite to replace the dragon that had finally given up its fight against the wind. The part where we figure out what normal looks like, he said. Normal, as it turned out, looked different than Daniel had expected. The consulting position with the Department of Justice had materialized into something more substantial than he'd anticipated. 3 days a week, he traveled to corporate facilities across the country, reviewing safety protocols, identifying risk factors, teaching executives what he'd learned about the distance between acceptable risk and acceptable behavior. The work suited him in ways he hadn't predicted. It wasn't just about finding problems, it was about preventing them, about walking into a building and seeing not just what was wrong, but what could go wrong, and helping people understand the difference between cost-cutting and catastrophe. You have a gift, Sandra Chen told him after one particularly successful intervention. You see systems the way other people see faces, the patterns, the weaknesses, the places where pressure builds until something breaks. I just pay attention. Most people don't. That's the gift. Catherine's work had evolved too. The Meridian story had made her reputation, not just as a journalist, but as someone who could hold power accountable without destroying herself in the process. She'd been offered positions at major publications, television networks, prestigious think tanks. She'd turned them all down. Instead, she'd started something new, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping whistleblowers and investigative journalists navigate the dangerous terrain of corporate accountability. She called it the Lighthouse Project, and within 6 months it had helped expose safety violations at 3 major companies and protected a dozen sources from retaliation. You're building something, Daniel observed one evening, watching her work at the kitchen table surrounded by case files and legal briefs. We're building something, she corrected. I couldn't do any of this without you. I just answer phones occasionally. You provide moral support. That's more valuable than you think. Emma had adapted to their new configuration with the flexibility only children possess. Catherine had moved in officially in March, transforming the 2-bedroom apartment into something that felt less like survival and more like a home. The paper cranes had spread from Daniel's room to every surface, windowsills and bookshelves and the top of the refrigerator where Emma insisted they could watch over the food. Mrs. Patterson remained a constant presence, still watching Emma when Daniel traveled and Catherine worked late, still dispensing wisdom like she was being paid by the insight. You look happy, she told Daniel one afternoon, studying him with those sharp eyes that miss nothing. I'm trying to be. That's different from actually being. Is it? Trying is effort. Being is acceptance. She patted his hand. You've been trying for 3 years. Maybe it's time to just be. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in August, delivered by courier to their apartment door. Catherine was the one who opened it. Daniel was in the kitchen attempting to recreate his mother's recipe for chicken tortilla soup, while Emma provided running commentary on his technique. You're stirring too fast, Emma observed. Mommy always said slow circles. Your mommy had more patience than me. Everyone has more patience than you, Daddy. That's why you're good at fixing things. You want them fixed fast. Is that a compliment? Mrs. Patterson says observations aren't compliments or insults. They're just true. Catherine appeared in the doorway, envelope in hand, expression unreadable. Daniel, you need to see this. He left the soup to Emma's supervision and took the envelope. Heavy paper, embossed letterhead. The return address was a law firm he didn't recognize, but the contents made his heart stop. It was an invitation to Bellamy's, not just any invitation, a formal request for his presence at a private dinner hosted by the restaurant's management. The purpose, according to the carefully worded letter, was to discuss a matter of mutual interest regarding the establishment's future safety protocols. They want to hire me, Daniel said, understanding clicking into place. It looks that way. As what? A consultant? Read the rest. He flipped to the second page. The terms outlined there were more than generous. They were transformative. A full-time position as Director of Safety and Security for Bellamy's Restaurant Group, which apparently included 12 establishments across the East Coast. Salary, benefits, equity stake. The works. This is, He couldn't find the words. It's what you deserve, Catherine said. It's recognition of what you can do. I have a job. You have a consulting gig that takes you away from your daughter 3 days a week. This would be different, more stable, more present. Daniel looked at the letter again. The numbers blurred as he tried to process what they meant, not just financially, but symbolically. The place where everything had started, offering him a chance to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. I'd need to think about it. Of course. Talk to Emma. She's 8. She'll say yes to anything that comes with a fancy dinner. You don't know that, Catherine smiled. I know her. She wants her father home. She wants stability. She wants to stop worrying every time you get on a plane. She worries? She's your daughter. Worrying is genetic. Emma appeared in the doorway, wooden spoon in hand. The soup is bubbling. Is that good or bad? Good, Daniel said absently. Low bubbles are good. What's in the envelope? He looked at his daughter, at the woman who had become his partner, at the apartment filled with paper cranes and books and all the accumulated evidence of a life rebuilt from wreckage. An opportunity, he said. Maybe. What kind of opportunity? The kind that means I might be home more. If I want it. Emma's face lit up. You should want it, Daddy. You should definitely want it. It's not that simple. Why not? He didn't have a good answer. The dinner at Bellamy's was scheduled for the following week. Daniel arrived alone. Catherine had insisted that this was a decision he needed to make without influence, and Emma was with Mrs. Patterson, probably teaching the security detail how to make increasingly complex origami. The restaurant looked different in the autumn light. Softer, somehow. Less imposing. The chandeliers still caught light like frozen tears, but now they seemed less melancholy, more hopeful. The manager who greeted him was new, a woman named Victoria Chen, no relation to Sandra, who had taken over after the original management had been quietly replaced in the wake of the scandal. Mr. Cross, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. We've wanted to reach out for some time, but we thought it best to wait until the trials were concluded, until things had settled. Things have settled. Have they? Victoria led him through the restaurant to a private room in the back. I've followed your work with the Department of Justice. Your consulting practice. You have a reputation for seeing problems before they become disasters. I pay attention. Most people don't. That's why we need you. The private room was intimate. A single table, set for 2, with a view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Someone had placed a small paper crane on his plate, and Daniel recognized Emma's handiwork immediately. Your daughter, Victoria explained. She sent it ahead, said you might need luck. She's 8 years old and already running operations. She learned from someone. Victoria sat across from him. Mr. Cross, I'll be direct. When the incident happened here, when those men cornered that journalist, our security failed completely. We had cameras, protocols, trained personnel. None of it mattered. The only thing that prevented a disaster was you. I was in the right place at the right time. You were in the same place as everyone else in this restaurant. The difference is that you saw what was happening and did something about it. Daniel picked up the crane, turned it over in his hands. What exactly are you offering? Full oversight of security for all 12 Bellamy's locations. Design new protocols, train staff, review hiring practices. Make sure that what happened here never happens again. That's a lot of responsibility. You've handled more. I've also failed more than you know. Victoria leaned forward. Mr. Cross, I've read everything about you. The Blackwood Institute, the training programs, the wife you lost. Her voice softened. I know you blame yourself. I know you think that if you'd been there, if you'd seen the signs sooner, things might have been different. You don't know anything about what I think. I know that guilt makes people either paralyzed or passionate, and you, clearly, are not paralyzed. She held his gaze. We're not offering you this position because of what happened here. We're offering it because of what you've done since. The families you've helped. The systems you've improved. The lives you've saved by preventing disasters before they happen. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I have conditions, he said finally. Name them. I need flexibility for my family. My daughter is 8. She needs a present father, not another workaholic who misses every school play. Flexible hours, remote work when possible, we can accommodate that. I need authority, real authority. If I identify a problem, I need the power to fix it without running through 15 layers of approval. Done. And I need you to understand something. Daniel set down the crane. I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not doing it for the prestige. I'm doing it because I believe that every person who walks into one of your restaurants deserves to walk out again. If that priority ever changes, if profit ever becomes more important than people, I'm gone. Victoria didn't hesitate. That's exactly why we want you. They shook hands across the table, and Daniel felt something shift, not just in his circumstances, but in his understanding of himself. For 3 years, he'd defined himself by what he'd lost. Now, finally, he was beginning to define himself by what he could build. The first year in his new role was a whirlwind of assessments, renovations, and staff training. Daniel traveled to each of the 12 Bellamy's locations, spending weeks at a time mapping vulnerabilities, redesigning protocols, teaching employees to see what he saw. Emma came with him when she could, summer vacation, school breaks, any opportunity to turn work travel into family adventure. She became the unofficial mascot of the Bellamy's security team, distributing paper cranes to employees who passed her training standards, which she had developed entirely on her own, and which somehow seemed more rigorous than anything Daniel could have devised. You gave Mr. Harrison a crane, Daniel observed one evening, watching Emma sort through her paper supply. He failed the emergency response drill. He failed the drill, but he tried really hard. Emma's logic was unassailable. Cranes are for trying, not just for succeeding. That's very generous. Mommy always said generosity was its own reward. Catherine's lighthouse project had grown into something substantial. A full staff, a proper office, a reputation that attracted both funding and whistleblowers in equal measure. She and Daniel had settled into a rhythm that felt natural, sharing the responsibilities of parenting and work, building something together that neither could have built alone. Mrs. Patterson had finally agreed to accept payment for her years of babysitting, though she insisted on donating most of it to Emma's Crane Fund, a savings account that would eventually pay for college or art supplies or whatever else Emma decided she needed to change the world. You're happy, Mrs. Patterson observed one afternoon, watching Daniel help Emma with her homework at the kitchen table. Actually happy, not trying to be happy, just happy. Is there a difference? There's always a difference, she smiled, but you finally stopped noticing it. The incident happened on a rainy Thursday in March. Daniel was at the flagship Bellamy's location, conducting a routine security review, when he noticed something wrong. 3 men in dark suits, positioned at intervals around the dining room. Professional bearing, tactical awareness. The same geometry he'd seen 3 years ago, aimed at a different target. The target this time was a young man, barely 20, nervous, clutching a laptop bag like it contained his life's work. He sat alone at a corner table, eyes darting between his phone and the exit. Daniel moved without thinking. He approached the young man's table and sat down across from him, his body positioned to block the view from 2 of the 3 men. Don't react, he said quietly. Just keep looking at me. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm head of security for this restaurant. You're being watched. The young man's face went pale. I know. They've been following me for 3 days. Who are you? My name is James Porter. I'm a software engineer at Nexus Financial. His voice trembled. I found something. In their systems. Something they don't want anyone to know about. Daniel felt the weight of déjà vu settle over him. What kind of something? Fraud. Massive fraud. They've been manipulating market algorithms to steal from pension funds, millions of dollars, maybe billions. And you have proof? James touched his laptop bag. Everything. All of it. I was supposed to meet a reporter here, but she's not coming. How do you know? Because they would have intercepted her. They're not here to stop you from meeting her. They're here to confirm that you're alone. Daniel scanned the room. The 3 men hadn't moved, but their attention had sharpened. What's your exit strategy? I didn't think. That's okay. That's what I'm here for. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. The main entrance was compromised. The kitchen exit led to an alley that could easily be blocked. The emergency exit near the restrooms was equipped with an alarm that would draw attention. But there was another way. "Listen carefully," he said. "In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you're going to walk, not run, to the service corridor behind the bar. Third door on the left leads to the loading dock. There'll be a delivery truck there. The driver's name is Marcus. Tell him Cross sent you." "How do you know there'll be a truck?" "Because I designed the delivery schedule." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "Being paranoid has its advantages." "Why are you helping me?" "Because 3 years ago, someone helped me, and I promised myself I'd pay it forward." James looked at him, really looked, and Daniel saw something in the young man's eyes that he recognized. Fear, yes, but also determination, the same combination that had driven Catherine through years of investigation, that had kept the Hartwell families fighting, that had ultimately brought down an empire built on suffering. "Thank you," James said. "Thank me when you're safe." Daniel checked his watch. 20 seconds. "Remember, walk, don't run. Third door on the left." He stood and walked toward the nearest of the three men, his posture deliberately casual, his expression friendly. "Excuse me," he said. "I couldn't help noticing you've been here for a while without ordering. Can I help you with something?" The man's eyes narrowed. "We're waiting for friends." "I see. Well, while you're waiting, can I interest you in our evening specials? The chef has prepared a remarkable—" "We're fine." "Are you sure? The risotto is particularly—" "I said we're fine." Daniel held the man's gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to establish dominance, short enough not to escalate. Then he smiled. "Of course. Let me know if you change your mind." He turned and walked away, counting steps in his head. 1, 2, 3. At 4, he reached the host station and pressed the button that activated the kitchen fire suppression test, a protocol he'd installed specifically for situations like this. The sprinklers didn't activate, but the alarms did. Loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. The dining room erupted into controlled chaos. Staff began their evacuation protocols. Guests moved toward exits. And in the confusion, Daniel saw James Porter slip through the service corridor door and disappear. The three men tried to follow, but Daniel was already there, blocking the entrance with his body and a clipboard that he waved at them with bureaucratic authority. "I'm sorry, this area is restricted during emergency protocols. For your safety, please proceed to the main exit. Get out of our way." "Sir, I understand you're concerned, but I'm going to have to insist." One of the men reached for Daniel's arm. It was the wrong move. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. Daniel didn't fight. Fighting was messy, unpredictable, likely to result in casualties. Instead, he redirected. A grip neutralized here. Balance disrupted there. By the time it was over, all three men were on the ground, restrained with zip ties Daniel had started carrying after the original Bellamy's incident. He pulled out his phone and called Agent Reyes. "I have a situation," he said, "and a very scared whistleblower who needs protection." The Nexus Financial story broke 3 weeks later. Catherine's Lighthouse project handled the media coordination, ensuring that James Porter's evidence reached the right journalists while keeping James himself protected from retaliation. The fraud he'd uncovered was even larger than he'd suspected, a scheme that had stolen over $2 billion from pension funds across the country. The executives responsible were arrested within the month. The company collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, and James Porter became a hero, though he insisted on sharing credit with the security guy at Bellamy's who saved my life. Daniel refused all interviews, but Emma made James a special crane, a gold one, folded from paper she'd been saving for someone really brave. "You're a hero again," she told Daniel that evening, presenting him with a matching gold crane. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who pays attention. That's what heroes do." Emma's voice carried absolute certainty. They pay attention when everyone else looks away. Daniel looked at the crane in his hands, at his daughter, who had grown so much in 4 years, at Catherine, watching from the doorway with tears in her eyes, at the apartment filled with evidence of a life he'd never expected to have. "Maybe you're right," he said. The wedding happened in the spring. They held it in the garden of a small inn outside the city. Catherine's idea, because she wanted something intimate, something that felt like them rather than a performance for others. The guest list was small: Mrs. Patterson, Agent Reyes, Sandra Chen, Maria Santos, and a handful of others who had become family over the past 4 years. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, insisting that combining the roles was more efficient and that she'd practiced enough to handle both responsibilities without dropping anything. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Daniel looked at Catherine. At the woman who had started as a story and become his whole story, at the partner who had helped him rebuild something he'd thought was lost forever. "I do." "And do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Catherine's smile was brighter than the spring sunshine. "I do." The reception was simple: good food, good company, paper cranes on every table, because Emma had insisted that any celebration without cranes wasn't really a celebration at all. Mrs. Patterson gave a toast that made everyone cry. Agent Reyes gave one that made everyone laugh. And when the dancing started, Emma demanded that Daniel teach her the steps he'd learned from Sarah all those years ago, when they were young and in love and thought they had forever. "Mommy taught you this?" Emma asked as they moved across the floor. "She did." "Is she watching?" Daniel thought about the question, about Sarah, about memory, about the ways love persists even when the people who carry it are gone. "I think she is," he said. "I think she's proud of us." "I think so too." Emma looked up at him with eyes that were Sarah's eyes, that were his eyes, that were entirely her own. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "I'm glad you didn't stay sad forever." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." 5 years after the Bellamy's incident, Daniel received a letter. It came from the minimum security facility in Connecticut, written in handwriting that had become familiar over years of sporadic correspondence. Marcus Sterling's sentences were shorter now, his thoughts more focused. Prison had changed him, not into a different person, but into a more distilled version of who he might have been if tragedy and ambition hadn't led him astray. The letter was brief. "I'm being released next month. Early parole for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations. I wanted you to know before you heard it from the news. I don't expect anything from you. I know that our connection, if it can be called that, was forged in circumstances that neither of us would have chosen. But I wanted to thank you one more time for seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. I'm going to work with at-risk youth when I get out, teaching them about the choices that lead to ruin and the choices that lead to redemption. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. I don't know if anyone will trust me enough to let me try. But I'm going to try anyway, because a little girl once told her father that trying is the first step to doing. I've kept every crane you've sent me over the years. They sit on my shelf, a reminder that even broken things can be beautiful. Thank you for teaching me to fold. Marcus." Daniel read the letter twice. Then he picked up a piece of paper, yellow, like the first crane Emma had given him, and began to fold. On a Sunday morning in September, Daniel returned to Bellamy's, not as a security consultant, not as an employee, just as a man taking his family to brunch. Emma was 12 now, tall for her age, her mother's eyes still watching the world with that impossible mix of wonder and wisdom. She'd started middle school in the fall, and already she was organizing clubs and leading initiatives, her paper crane project having evolved into a nonprofit that sent origami kits to children in hospitals across the country. Catherine sat across from him, her hand resting on the slight curve of her belly. 4 months along. A brother or sister for Emma, a new chapter in a story that kept finding ways to continue. "You're quiet," Catherine observed, "just thinking." "About?" Daniel looked around the restaurant, at the chandeliers still catching light like frozen tears, at the corner table where he'd first seen a woman in danger, at the space that had changed his life in ways he still couldn't fully comprehend. "About how strange it is," he said. 5 years ago, I walked into this place to buy my daughter a birthday dinner. I didn't know it would lead to all of this. Do you regret it? The investigation? The trials? The years of chaos? Any of it? Daniel considered the question. The long nights and difficult conversations, the threats and the fear, the moments when he'd wondered if he'd made the right choice by stepping forward instead of looking away. No, he said finally. I don't regret any of it. Not even the hard parts? Especially not the hard parts. The hard parts are what made the good parts possible. Emma looked up from the menu she'd been studying. What are you guys talking about? The past, Daniel said. The past is boring. Can we talk about the future instead? Catherine laughed. What about the future? Like, what are we going to name the baby? Because I have a list, and most of the names are really good, but a few are just for backup in case you don't like the good ones. Let's hear the good ones. Emma pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. Okay, so if it's a girl, I think we should name her Crane, because cranes are our thing. And if it's a boy, we should name him Phoenix, because phoenixes rise from ashes, and that's kind of what our family did. Daniel felt something catch in his throat. Those are very meaningful names, he managed. I know, I thought about them a lot. Emma studied her parents' faces. Are you crying? Why are you crying? Happy tears, Catherine said. The best kind. Grown-ups are weird. Emma returned to her menu. Can I get the chocolate chip pancakes? It's brunch. You can get whatever you want. Then I want chocolate chip pancakes and also the fruit plate because Mrs. Patterson says balance is important. The waiter arrived, a young woman Daniel recognized from the security training he'd conducted the previous month. She smiled at him with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she was prepared for whatever might happen. Good morning, Mr. Cross. The usual? The usual. And whatever my daughter wants, within reason. Chocolate chip pancakes are within reason, Emma said quickly. They certainly are. The waiter turned to Catherine. And for you? The garden omelet, extra vegetables. Perfect. She collected the menus. It's good to see you, Mr. Cross. All of you. It's nice when the good guys win. She walked away before Daniel could respond. What did she mean by that? Emma asked. She meant that sometimes when you do the right thing, people remember, and they're grateful. Is that why you keep doing it? Because people are grateful? Daniel thought about the question, about all the reasons he'd had over the years for stepping forward when stepping back would have been easier, for seeing when looking away would have been safer, for trying when giving up would have been understandable. No, he said. I do it because it's right. The gratitude is just extra. Like sprinkles on ice cream? Exactly like sprinkles on ice cream. Emma nodded, satisfied by this explanation. Daddy? Yes? I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. I know, she grinned, but I'm going to keep saying it anyway. Mrs. Patterson says the words we need to hear are the words we should say out loud. Daniel reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. Then he reached for Catherine's. The three of them sat there, connected, while the restaurant hummed around them and the chandeliers caught light like frozen tears, and the world continued its complicated, beautiful spinning. I love you both, Daniel said, in case I don't say it enough. You say it plenty, Catherine assured him. But you can say it more, Emma added. More is always okay. The pancakes arrived, the morning unfolded, and Daniel Cross, former maintenance technician, former invisible man, former husband of Sarah Elizabeth Cross, sat in the restaurant where everything had changed and watched his daughter eat chocolate chips while his wife discussed baby names while the future stretched ahead of them like a road with no end in sight. Outside the window, the city moved through its Sunday rhythms. People walked dogs and pushed strollers and lived their lives without knowing that the man eating brunch with his family had once stood in this very room and said 5 words that changed everything. Wrong table. Wrong day. But it hadn't been wrong at all. It had been exactly right. Later that afternoon, Daniel sat alone in the living room of the apartment that had become a home. Catherine was napping. Emma was at Mrs. Patterson's, probably teaching some new security detail how to fold increasingly complex origami. He pulled out a piece of paper, the same yellow paper Emma had used for her first crane, the one she'd given him before the warehouse, and began to fold. The motions were automatic now. Years of practice had made them part of his muscle memory, as natural as breathing, as essential as heartbeat. When he finished, he held the crane up to the light. It wasn't perfect. The wings were slightly uneven. the head tilted at an angle that suggested skepticism rather than hope, but it was his, and in its imperfection, it was beautiful. Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the city, at the buildings and streets and millions of lives unfolding in their own private dramas, at the world that had tried to break him and somehow, impossibly, had made him stronger instead. He thought about Sarah, about the morning she'd left for her sister's apartment, not knowing it was the last time, about the love they'd shared and the daughter they'd created and the legacy she'd left behind. He thought about Catherine, about the woman who had started as a stranger in danger and become his partner in everything, about the child growing inside her, the future they were building together. He thought about Emma, about paper cranes and impossible hope and the way children can teach adults to see the world again. And he thought about all the others, the families who had lost people in the Hartwell fire, the whistleblowers who had risked everything to tell the truth. Marcus Sterling, trying to build something good from the wreckage of his choices. Agent Reyes and Sandra Chen and Mrs. Patterson and everyone else who had helped him find his way back to the light. He set the crane on the windowsill, next to the hundreds of others that had accumulated over the years. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new problems to solve, new people who needed someone to see them when everyone else was looking away. But today, there was only this: a man, a family, a life rebuilt from wreckage, and the quiet certainty that some things, broken beyond all hope of repair, could still become beautiful. Daniel Cross turned away from the window and went to find his daughter. There were cranes to fold, and the future, whatever it held, would take care of itself.